Yo, this is Alex Leonidas, and today I'm bringing you an exclusive interview with FreakieD, also known as Dennis Arnold. He's the strongest OG of the noble natty community, who's been documenting his journey while sharing incredible training advice over the last 10 years. I highly recommend subscribing now, and after our talk, you'll see why. Some of his best lifts include a 550 bench press, 775 barbell squat, 705 conventional deadlift, 550 front squat without sleeves, 350 OHB, 48-inch box jump at 288 plus deficit handstand push-ups for reps, 339 log clean and press, and a 505 Larson press. Truly freaky strength. So get ready to learn a ton about programming and be inspired. Dennis, how you doing?
Good, man. I appreciate the intro there. Been a long time. Me and you have been on this platform for what seems like, I guess it has been a decade. I think I uploaded my first video in 2013. We're the old men of this at this point.
You're the super OG. I used to watch YouTube Fitness back in 2009, but I wasn't a contributor until November of 2013. So we've been at this for around a similar time frame, but you were just uploading PRs.
I think I signed up for my account in like 07 and just watched videos. And yeah, my first video upload was also 2013.
Wow. So you've seen all the changes throughout the years, and I'm sure you have a lot to say about that. Actually, I'm just curious, what are the differences from back then till now?
From what I've seen and when I first started watching, like if you were strong and could do voiceovers, like voiceovers was top tier production. And just clips, and like the 3-minute video was kind of the shtick back then, and just putting up big numbers and being strong. And then now more people are doing it as a career, which is fine. There's nothing wrong with that, and I think it's up the level of production, video quality, etc. As far as the training, I think it's a lot more open-minded now. People are a lot more willing to experiment, look outside of the box and see what others are doing. And whereas back then it was like, oh, my way is the way and your way is wrong if you're not doing it my way. There's a lot more discussion, open discussion, thoughtful discussion amongst the naturals in the community through various disciplines, even people training different within the same discipline, bouncing ideas off of each other and feeding off of that instead of saying, my way good, your way bad.
Right. So getting rid of dogmatism has been the biggest thing. And instead of being married to one ideology, like I'm a powerlifter, I'm a strong man, this style of periodization is not optimal, or this exercise is not the best. Everyone is receptive to new ideas, no matter the discipline.
Absolutely. And I've been very guilty of that myself. I was very powerlifter centric, linear periodization centric, and everything else was dumb because what I was doing was working and I was stronger than everybody who had something to say about it. So obviously my way is the right way. Now in retrospect, it feels dumb to even have thought that way. But that's kind of the learning process I think almost everybody goes through. You get started, something works for you, and then you just want to tell everybody about it, and it's the greatest thing in the world. And then especially if you've got some numbers or the physique or whatever the case may be to kind of back up what you're personally saying, it just ingrains it in you even more that, your way is the way.
Absolutely. I kind of went through the same thing as you, but on the opposite side, in the sense that I was only conjugate.
Right.
Like that's the only way to periodize. Linear periodization is completely outdated. It doesn't work. And then guys were sending me all these IPF powerlifters, and they're like, well, how come they're at the world level? I'm like, oh, it's because they're not on it yet. But eventually they're going to go back to the teachings of Louis Simmons and whatnot. And although I still think it is the way for general strength development, I do see the point that higher specificity training can probably get you faster results, or at least you can say more directed results for what you're doing.
Yeah, I've opened my mind to conjugate, especially for general strength. Like I can see the value of it, and have certainly taken some aspects of it and thrown it into my training. Again, when you talk about like just powerlifting, specificity is a thing, and you have to be good at the movements. How far away you get from the specificity, people will, argue about that blurry line, but that line is blurry, and it's going to be, different parts of that blurry line for different people, just, based on a number of factors.
Yeah. And I think that's where a lot of the confusion came from, that people were confusing powerlifting with strength training, period.
Right.
Like they're inseparable, when in reality, there's many ways you can train to get strong. Right. And the conjugate system is a good example of that, because you can also do weighted dips, weighted pull-ups. You might have a very strong overhead press as well, which you can say is less specific. And I know with yourself, you've put up some crazy numbers. Like, what is your best overhead press?
I've strict OHP 350 pounds.
Back in the day, I didn't even think that was possible. I thought that even 3 plates was the pinnacle of those who were genetically elite. And now we have guys like yourself in the mid 300s, and also Andrew Richard doing 500 pounds.
Like, yeah, Andrew Richard, I'm glad you mentioned him because I was going to try to bring him up at some point in this conversation too. That is just mind blowing to see that sheer amount of weight being pressed overhead. And now, like, he's doing mid fours and close to five and making it look fast. And
Yeah,
it's just
deep
absolutely
reps.
mind blowing. Like, it took me a long time to bench press 500, and a lot of people will never bench press 500. And to see somebody strictly putting it overhead is just crazy.
Yeah, well, we're definitely going to get back to that later. But I do want to ask you about your benching journey because I believe your all time best is 550 pounds.
Yes, yes.
So, how long did it take you to get there?
If we're talking like on a timeline, I did my first bench press when I was around 13 years old, and then I hit 500 for the first time in the gym. I want to say I was trying to remember, it was in 2014, so I would have been 28, 29, 28, my late 20s. So, on a timeline, it took 15 years or so. Not all of those 15 years I trained.
Really?
Yeah, I bench pressed, and I was a bench bro back in the day. Did 1 year of we had a weightlifting class in high school, which it was just a glorified bench bro type thing. It wasn't a class. It was like, here's weights and stuff, and you guys stay out of my hair for 90 minutes, and we just bench pressed. I ended up benching 235. I think I had it my junior year in high school. I benched 235 at like 185 body weight. Then I didn't lift weights again until I was 22.
What?
Late 21. Yeah, and again, I took my income tax 1 year, my income tax check, and I bought a bench from, going to date myself here, from Sears. I don't think any of them exist anymore, but I bought one of the Weeder bench sets. Came with like 300 pounds, a cheap bar. And me and my roommate, we would basically just bench 5 days a week. This was pre-social media. I didn't know powerlifting was a thing. I didn't know squats and deadlifts were a thing. I knew people said, how much do you bench, when people were jacked. And so, damn it, we were just going to bench press our asses off. And we'd bench Monday through Friday after work, max out every Monday. We would go to failure every single day. We'd just do like a heavy day, light day, and just go to failure every day. And then we'd play basketball after, and that was our quote unquote leg training. I benched like right around 225 when we started that year. And I went from 225 to 405 in a year.
1 year.
Yeah, but that was benching balls to the wall 5 days a week. Of course, we were eating tons of food. Eat big, get big. I think I started that year. Numbers are going to be a little off, but roughly I was around 220 pounds. I was probably 245 pounds by the end of the year.
That's
So
crazy.
I put on like 25 pounds. Of course, it's not all muscle, but
It's not a lot of fat gain for the amount of weight that you added to your bench.
yeah,
Considering.
yeah, and like my roommate, my training partner, he was like a buck 35 starting the year, and he ended up like 160 at the end of the year, and he was just Jack Diesel, shorter guy. He was like 5'5",
How much
but
was
ended
he
up
benching?
160, just jacked. He was benching over 225 at the end of the year. Then moved to a different apartment. I couldn't set up my bench, so I didn't lift again for like another year or two. Then I moved from Florida to Tennessee, and then I started my bench bro stuff again up here. And that's when I first started uploading on YouTube. I think I uploaded like a 405 by 3 bench press was my first upload with gloves on. I benched more than a lot of people will squat, and I was wearing bitch mittens, quote unquote. So that's always fun. And then I made friend Toby Adler. You know Toby.
Of course.
He was like one of the first people that subscribed to my channel, and he was deadlifting big weights and squatting big weights, and I didn't know what it was. And he kind of introduced me to powerlifting and said,
Wow.
"Man, you've got a good bench. You should probably try powerlifting." And so I was at that point, I started squatting out of my rickety bench press setup as well, and deadlifting. And that's when 2013 is when I started kind of taking lifting more seriously, and looking at like what other people were doing and what information was out there. And at the time, strength training, like you said, was confused with powerlifting. Powerlifting was strength training.
Yeah.
And looking back at it now, I think a lot of it is there was a lot of fluff on the internet before from like fitness magazines and stuff like that. And the old geared power lifters were kind of the first people to put good information on the internet. Now, it's not information that's going to apply to everybody's strength training journey, but what was there was good. And I think a lot of people saw good results with that, both with hypertrophy and strength training. And so it kind of got written down as gospel, whereas maybe it shouldn't have. But anyway, when I started taking that seriously, my bench saw gains again because, you know, my lower body was obviously lacking. I was benching mid 400s the first time I ever deadlifted or squatted. And, you know, I deadlifted, I think, 315 or 325. And I couldn't even hang on to a 345 deadlift.
Wow.
I lost it from my grip.
Benching more than you deadlifted.
Right. And then I ended up finding a gym because I was getting too scared to squat out of my janky setup. And it was at that gym, you know, with I had 5x5 was my first sort of periodization, and I ran 5x5s on my bench squats and deadlifts, and that's what sort of took me to a 500-pound bench press at that point. Along with, you know, still gaining some more weight. I ended up, the very first time I bench pressed 500 in the gym, I was right at 270 pounds body weight. So I'd gained, you know, from like 220 when I first started my bench pro as an adult to about 260 and, you know, 225 bench press to 500-pound bench press.
Wow. So it's really only about 50 pounds of weight gain, realistically speaking.
Right.
In terms of pure fat from your starting point.
500 to 550, you know, that 270 went up to like 312. So that slog from 500 to 550 was a tough one.
Yeah. And right now, since you've lost most of the weight, you're still benching in the mid fours, right?
Yeah, I competed in April. I did a bench only, and I benched 441, 200 kilos at 212 pounds body weight.
That's excellent pound for pound strength. So aside from the fact that you were just training your ass off with someone who was on the same mindset as you, gaining weight was never a concern. And I've seen some of your videos talking about how bloat maxing, or rather becoming obese, is always one of those cards that you can pull to get super strong.
Right.
How strong do you think you could have gone if you would have done more of a lean bulk? Do you think you'd be stronger than where you're at right now, or was it essential for you to get up to that super heavy body weight and then cut back down and retain a lot of the benching performance? Because you were doing 405 at much lighter body weight.
I think in retrospect, if maybe I would have stretched out the bulking a little bit longer and then saved that absolute bloat card for a little bit later, perhaps the number could have got bigger. I could have also pushed the bloat higher, to be honest, really? Appetite wise. I always did my cardio, even at my heaviest. I could still move around pretty well. You know, there's videos of me doing strict handstand push-ups at 308. You know, I did a 47-inch box jump at 288. So that was never an issue, but sleeping was a big issue. And I would start to feel a little uncomfortable holding over 300 pounds for more than a month or two. I'd inevitably get sick. But appetite-wise, I think if I could have timed it up right, lean bulked a little bit longer and saved the bloating for a little bit later, maybe, and it's all speculation, of course, but there's a possibility that I could have hit higher ultimate numbers. Of course, and avoided some injuries I accumulated along the way too, and then, you know, cut back down and perhaps be at a higher number now. But again, it's speculation at best.
Yeah, and there's no regrets in your entire loading journey, but probably won't go back there again after losing all that weight.
No. I'll be 38 this year. I am okay with my biggest numbers being behind me at this point. I still have that ego in the back of my head. It's hard because I was attached to my numbers.
Yeah.
But, you know, there's priorities. I mean, I almost got divorced over powerlifting back in like 2018. Wow. Yeah. Me and my wife separated for a few months because I was putting powerlifting ahead of everything. That was an eye opener too. And
right.
So now, you know, priorities. My son, he's 8. He'll be 9 next weekend. Being able to run around with him. He's training jiu-jitsu now. He's been training jiu-jitsu for almost a year. So I got to look at things like that so he can't kick my ass in a few years.
Yeah, it's interesting how priorities can change, especially when you were the best. Like literally in our community, there's no one else who's put up numbers like you, but you're willing to accept certain things. Maybe your all-time best numbers are behind you, but there's still progress to be made, just at a lighter body weight, right? So you're going to shoot for more relative strength PRs, I assume. Like, do you think 500 is in the cards again, at least.
I've flirted with the idea of 500 as a 242 because I've benched 500 as a 275, as a 308, and a super heavyweight, all in competition. So like doing it drug tested in 4 different weight classes would be pretty cool. But the funny thing is, now after having been 300 pounds for all those years, I would cut down from 300 to like the 270s and maintain, and then, bulk into a meet. I would feel lean at 270 after carrying 300.
Wow.
As of right now, when I ended my cut, I was down around 215, 216. Then I maintained 220 for a while. And then after my meet, I said, I'll put on a few more pounds. I'd like to add a little bit more muscle. So I'm on a given day, 227 to 230 these days. And I feel fluffy. Like at 230, I was 300 pounds last year.
That's crazy.
And now I feel fluffy, if you will, at 230. I really like the way I felt around 220. I still felt pretty strong. I felt very athletic. And I think that's where my training goals will probably kind of tilt towards. I know you're familiar with Alec Onkiri.
Yep.
I've been friends with him for a while. I like that style of training, and it does give me things to chasing a bigger box jump or a sprint time or things like that. Max pull-ups for reps, not necessarily squat, bench, deadlift. While I can and am certainly going to try to hit new PRs, relative body weight and things like that, total weight on the bar always appealed to me so much more than relative weight. And it's just hitting that 441 at 212. I wanted to tick that double body weight box in competition, and I did. Still not as satisfying to me as, hitting 525 in competition at 304, even with, having those 5 plates on, being the last person to bench and all eyes on you.
Yeah.
It's just, everybody's got their preferences. So my training will be a lot more well-rounded and less powerlifting centric. I say that as I've signed up for a powerlifting meet that I'm competing in October.
Nice. I like that you mentioned Alec because I feel like his system that he calls conjugish is one of the best for just developing every possible attribute. And the exercise selection is perfect in my eyes. The snatch grip, high pulls, the kettlebell swings, the sled drags, stuff that's not too technical, but you can still build your conditioning. And then there's always like an explosive and strength element combined, like also doing push presses instead of little partial pin presses and whatnot. So the higher size selection to minimize overuse. So I'm guessing you're training in a similar kind of way.
Yeah, I call it Crossfat.
Crossfat.
Yeah. And I would do things like this in my powerlifting off seasons. Again, I always tried to stay in somewhat of an athletic shape, even when I was big. Of course, dropping some weight, I can jump a little bit more into the athletic side of things. I've found I've been doing stones lately. I've liked stones a lot. I'll do my barbell lifts, and then afterwards, maybe I'll pick like one strongman movement, be it Zercher yoke carries or stones or farmer's walks, and then something explosive, typically box jumps, because those are easier on my knees landing up on the box.
Yeah.
Sled sprints, pushes, pulls, things like that. And I've kind of pulled back on it here recently because I'm prepping for a meet, but that'll be the first thing that goes back into my off season. Will be that cross-fat element, if you will.
So how important is this cross-fat or GPP for powerlifters or strength athletes? Like, do you think you could have gone as far as you did without having the conditioning? Because even at a super heavyweight, you were still pretty conditioned. You were able to do what most people cannot do at that body weight. So
I think a minimum base level of cardio is necessary for any powerlifter. I always recommend 30 minutes of list cardio at least 3 times a week. As far as like the GPP stuff, I think everybody should be doing it at least in their warm-ups. It doesn't have to be extensive. Moderate weight, moderate intensity for 2 to 3 minutes, pushing a sled, pulling a sled. It really gets your muscles primed up. It makes your sessions better. Conditioning part be damned. You're gonna feel better going into your squats or your benches or your deadlifts after having done it. I do think a lot of people skimp on it.
So you would do sled pulls before doing squats and deadlifts?
Very light. This is not something that like is taxing me or anything. I mean, I'm talking about like I'd get the sled, little single stack sled, and put like 2 plates on it, and then wrap a strap around my hip, and I'd walk like 100 feet one way forwards and then 100 feet the other way backwards for 2 minutes. I just time it for 2 minutes, and do that. Yeah, it wouldn't be taxing at all. Just priming yourself, getting your muscles warm, things like that.
Interesting.
I generally prefer if I'm doing like the GPP for it to be hard and conditioning, that comes after the training for me.
Okay.
But you can use those same tools before training as a warm-up protocol,
Right.
just with much less intensity.
It's like what Louis Simmons said about the reverse hypers. You can do them before the squats, just
Yeah.
very light, and then at the end, and then you go balls to the wall, add a bunch of plates on. So you're doing the same thing, but with the GPP.
Right. Yeah. And
Awesome.
that reverse hyper, I've adopted that a lot lately too. Man,
Really,
I
eh?
think I'm the
Feel
only
it?
person in our gym that uses it for anything other than like a drink holder.
Yeah, exactly. But there's a lot you can do with it, surprisingly. Even
Absolutely.
leg extensions and neck extensions of all things get a traction effect on your
Right.
cervical discs. So it's a good therapeutic device.
It's a great tool for sure. It's slept on a lot, I think.
Right. So you would do the sled work before a leg day. What about the upper body? Do you incorporate something like a winning approach where it's like circuit style?
I wouldn't call it a winning approach, but I did like doing face pulls, very light, higher rep face pulls before benching. Every now and then I'd superset it with some triceps push downs. And again, it's something, same application. I would do it very light before I benched. And those were two of my go-to accessories after an upper body day. And then,
Yeah.
it'd be a little more intense. Still on the lighter side because they're more isolation movements. But, whereas in the warm-up, they'd maybe be sets of 25 and not really approaching failure at all.
Right.
After training, they'd probably be, in the 15-ish range and be at failure.
Gotcha. Now, I'm assuming that you required these, they're not extensive warm-ups, but these, additional warm-ups because you were so strong. Would you agree with that? That when you were weaker, you could just do an empty bar, slap on those plates, no problem. But that when you were approaching in the 700s on your squat and then benching the fives, that you kind of needed to do more things to get that groove right?
I think it's a combination of getting stronger and getting older.
Older, really.
Yeah, I think the age, when I was younger, and of course, I didn't start taking lifting seriously till kind of my later 20s anyway. So I was already older than a lot of people starting out. But still, that said, you could go in and just empty bar and go. But yeah, I think it's a combination of both the age and the strength, really making sure you feel those muscles and have them warmed up. You got 700 pounds on your back, man. It's scary every time. And you want to make sure everything's firing and functioning correctly.
So how is your recovery now compared to when you were in your prime? Even though you were lifting heavier, would you say it's about the same right now, just because you're a bit older?
It's close. I was eating a lot more back then, which certainly aided in recovery.
For sure.
But I eat a lot cleaner now, a lot more nutrient dense foods. Given that I'm not eating as many calories, I have to make sure I'm eating better calories for the ones that I am eating. I have pushed my cardio a lot harder these days than when I was in my prime of powerlifting too. Not that I neglected cardio, but now I've pushed it. It's close. It's aches and pains maybe last a little bit longer now that I'm approaching 40, but I'm also smarter with my training now. It'd be a toss up. I don't. If there is a difference, it's pretty small.
Right.
Maybe when I took this job, honestly, before I even really got serious in lifting, I used to move furniture. I moved furniture in the daytime and I sold shoes at night. And now I sit at a desk all day long. Maybe after a couple of years of working here, and now I'm really in tune with getting up every 20 or 30 minutes and walking a lap around the building or walking down to somebody else's office or something. But maybe
Interesting.
now that you've made me think about it, because I've never really sat down and thought about it, that kind of correlates with maybe after a year or two of working my desk job, when I started noticing that maybe not recovery so much was starting to tail off, but that I definitely needed to be more cognizant of moving around more often and keeping up with my movements.
I'm surprised because you would think that if you're doing a physical job, that would take more toll on your recovery, especially when you're dealing with these crazy absolute loads and you need those additional days to recover. But you're telling me the opposite, that by sitting down more, that actually hurts your recovery. So then I guess it goes back to what we were talking about before. Work capacity is everything.
It is, and your body will find its baseline. Like if that's what I tell people who are scared of cardio. Like I do cardio every morning, every single morning.
Yeah.
I'll do 30 to 45 minutes of list cardio on an elliptical machine before I come to work. Dialed it down to 20 minutes a morning now that I'm in meet prep. But your body will adjust to that baseline. Like you're not going to lose gains because of it. I'm just trying to hyper optimize, my lifting now. So I'm dialing the cardio back a little bit, but just for general strength and conditioning, yeah, your body will find its baseline. Like I used to move furniture all day, sometimes 16 hours a day in Central Florida in the summertime.
Wow.
95 degrees, 100% humidity, be up and ready to go the next day. And it was just normal,
I love hearing that, because I got a comment recently from someone who was in a similar position as yourself saying, Alex, you don't understand. I move furniture all day, frequent. I'm exhausted when I get home. And that's why I can't get good gains like you. It's because I'm so physically active. And now you're telling me that that's exactly what you did and more.
Yeah.
You surpassed all of us.
I mean, to be fair, like my heyday in lifting came after, I got this job. I was not moving furniture during my heyday. So I want to clarify that. However, your body does find its baseline. And for that guy, hopefully, or girl, I don't know who it was, if they're watching this, you just have to be on point with your other stuff. You might have to pay more attention to your diet, your hydration, especially your sodium intake, your sleep and recovery. You have to optimize those things more than the regular person who isn't exerting themselves all day. But you can absolutely still make gains and excel while having a physical job. There have been people who've done it before us. There are people who are going to do it after us.
Yeah, and it's what a lot of the Silver Era guys did as well.
Well, I mean, even Eddie Hall was a professional strongman and a diesel mechanic. Now, when he wanted to take it to the next level, he had to, make that choice and quit his day job. But that you're talking about milking out that last
the last 1%, exactly.
Post elite level. He was a pro strongman, which is the top that most everybody will never ever see while working a physical labor job.
That's a good distinction. And in a natural scene, like let's say someone's potential is to bench 405. And they have a very demanding job and they just can't recover properly. Maybe their sleep is garbage, not on a calorie surplus, everything is subpar. Well, maybe they won't get 4 plates, but they can do 3.5. And if you ask me, that's still pretty freaking amazing. So
absolutely.
And then if they eventually do dial things in, they'll gain those extra pounds if they need to.
And they might come within 1% of that 405, and then they have a choice to make, priority wise. Do I really absolutely have to have that 405, or do I really absolutely have to have this job? And that's when they've made it to 385. So they've still made, this giant bench press.
Exactly. And I think what's important here is just showing up and not making excuses.
Right.
Because what else are you going to do? Stay the same and claim that you hit your so-called limit? Because that's what I see nowadays. Actually, it's what I used to see. Because now people are awakening to the fact that everyone's been scammed.
Right. Absolutely. Yeah, it's unfortunate, what came before us, but we can help right that ship, and I think we are.
100%.
I will say till I'm blue in the face, there's absolutely no hard limit. The only limit we have is time. Time is going to catch us, and we're going to die. And I was talking to somebody the other day. I said, if we conceivably live to 1,000 years old, and our physical prime was from 50 years old to 950 years old before we started aging and deteriorating, you would be progressing that whole time if you were so inclined to do so. Progress would get slower at a point, and maybe it would take you 10 years to add 5 pounds to a certain lift. But when you've got 900 years to do it,
exactly,
there's no limit on your body itself. It's just the time is the only thing limiting us.
Yeah, and it's a distinction. There's no hard limits, quote unquote, in the sense that you can always milk a little something.
Yep.
And if it's not for one, like let's say you are mostly tapped out on a given exercise, well, there's always a variation that there's months or years of progress to make. And I think when we bring it back to general strength, it gives you that progress basically forever. Like if you were a bench specialist, all right, let me do some OHB now, see how much I can milk that. All right, now let's move on to dips. Let's move on to inclines. There's always something to progress on. And by saying that you hit your absolute limit on everything, it just doesn't make sense, even without the time
nobody will ever do that. Yeah. There's too much out there to be done.
Exactly. And even switching your goals, like what you're doing now, mixing in the Crossfat, quote unquote, you're far from your limit there. You're nowhere near your peak compared to your benching. So that's another 5 years of who knows what.
For sure, for sure. And that's also, we're talking about these different goals. That's something I also recommend to people who are more advanced or maybe even in the upper intermediates, to be semantical, when they're cutting weight. You know, everybody, well, can I get stronger on a cut? Can I get stronger on a cut? Well, if you're late intermediate, early advanced on, you know, your big three lifts or your big three and OHP and, you know, some of these more popular compounds, you're probably not going to get stronger at those. So do something else. Novel
Exactly.
stimulus. You do a variation you've never done. And if you're ego driven, like a lot of, you know, we have egos, and you need to see weight being put on the bar on a weekly or monthly basis, pick a new exercise that you've never done before, and you'll get that visual stimulus of adding weight to your lifts and getting stronger while you're cutting weight.
Yeah. Changing goals keeps you psychologically fresh when cutting weight, and it keeps you motivated to keep going because there's something that's improving. When it's just a downward spiral, it's a sucky feeling.
Oh yeah,
And
big time.
yeah, and I'm sure for you that must have really been horrible with the bench press specifically. But that's what happens. Like when I see people saying, "Oh, you can gain muscle and burn fat optimally," and these are my clients and they're first year lifters, I'm like, well, that's a very different story compared to someone benching between 3 and 5 plates, you know?
Absolutely.
So, like, I can say that in my experience, not once has my bench press ever improved during a cut. In fact, it's always gone down no matter what I tried. Eating as perfect as I can, dialing in the macros, periodizing to perfection, nothing works. I just get weaker, you know? Now, of course, when you hit a lighter body weight, you'll retain more than the previous time. You'll be stronger,
Right.
absolute and pound for
Absolutely.
pound,
Yep.
but you still won't keep your peak performance.
Yeah, no, me neither. And me and you are built pretty optimally for bench pressing, and we
That too,
still, you know,
right?
see that regression.
So the bench press is one of those lifts that's correlated with weight gain. The squat as well because you kind of bounce off your belly. But the deadlift, it seems like many retain it, at least more. In fact, they say you can get a leverage advantage by not having your gut in the way, since you can be narrower with your feet and hand placement, right?
So
So
I think there's there's kind of a fine line there, or maybe it's a fuzzy line. Having gone through this, my best deadlift in terms of absolute weight was, you know, when I was 300 pounds. I deadlifted 300 kilos, so 661 at 270 beltless in competition. And leverage wise, I was pretty good there. But again, there's still, how much weight are you going to lose? And that sort of leverage advantage kind of gives way to, okay, well, now you're getting smaller, though you're kind of losing some overall strength. So there's a point there.
true,
When I first started my cuts, or when I would cut from 300 down to 270, 280 and maintain that, my deadlift felt great there. But cutting
right?
down, you know, losing 80 pounds of body weight,
It's a
while I
lot.
am in a much better starting position on deadlifts, I gave away a lot of mass and strength. So it didn't, you know, it doesn't quite balance out. Of course, I've had a couple lower back issues too, so I've not really been wanting to push deadlift too hard either. That leverage thing, it's not an absolute thing in every scenario. You know, we're seeing now, especially in powerlifting with the new bars and the hyper advanced sumo techniques that people have learned how to do, you're seeing a lot smaller guys pulling a lot bigger numbers. But if you look historically, the biggest conventional deadlifts have still been, you know, fat guys.
True.
You know,
With
so
suboptimal technique to top it off.
yeah, there's a little bit of give and take there, but it is affected the least by the weight loss out of all the big three for sure.
Interesting. Now you mentioned you were deadlifting in like 660.
Beltless 660 at 270 was in competition. That was my best as a 275, and then I deadlifted 700 as a 308 in competition.
And what about gym PRs? Has that ever exceeded?
705. I got 5 pounds out of a pair of straps.
Okay, nice. And your best squat is around 770, right?
775, and that was in competition.
You squatted more than you deadlifted.
Yes.
So I think that's because of your build. Like you have a bencher's build, right? So
Right.
as someone who has that T-Rex action going on, I can relate. I always hated deadlifts for that exact reason.
Right.
What are some tips on dealing with lower back pain from these extended range of motion pulls? Because that's what they are. You're probably bent forward like a pendlay row, right? So
Right.
what's some blending techniques or programming methods to just minimize that overuse and maximize your progress on
So
pulls?
I've messed up and learned from my mistakes. I have yeeted my lower back more than once from just pushing too hard. You have to minimize fatigue where you can. Partial range of motion, block pulls, wagon wheels, I like particularly. Rack pulls can be done as well. I've always swayed more towards the block pulls and the wagon wheels just because powerlifting and they have a similar feel to deadlifting off the floor. As you know, rack pulls have a little bit different feel, but they can certainly be used as well. But partials are big there if you really want to push more volume and still be able to recover and not be in bad positions. And you got to know when to pull back, man. You can't push it as hard with our build. Like we can just squat. We can just set our butt down and squat, and we can just bench all day long. The bar moves in the correct path it needs to just by nature. We don't really have to cue a whole lot. That's even something that I incorporated Larson presses for, was to mitigate lower back fatigue and save it, for my deadlifts and squats. Because setting up in my competition bench press with the arch, there's some pressure on my lower back. When you lift the feet up, that pressure is completely gone. So as much as it's good for isolating upper body and making a movement harder, a big key for me was mitigating lower back fatigue, for my deadlifts. And if you're going to be a power lifter and you're built like we are and you get pretty advanced in the sport, fatigue mitigation becomes a big part of your training, particularly for deadlifts. And it's something where it's kind of a double-edged sword. Like, you don't want to train deadlifts too much because it can fatigue your lower back and put you at risk for injury and overuse. But you don't want to not deadlift because we have to dial in our technique so hard because we have to start in such an awful position.
Exactly. And it's like you can focus on hypertrophy, build all the muscles of the deadlift, but if you've been away from them for so long, it might feel a little bit wacky.
Right.
Particularly in the starting position.
Yeah, and something I've incorporated as of late, not just with deadlifts, but is using very shortened rest times, EMOMs, and taking like 80% of your 1 rep max. It's something that you can do for a very, very comfortable triple. You could do for a lot more, but you can do for a super comfortable triple any day of the week. And then just doing like 3 triples with 1 minute rest. And your second and third sets, you're still going to get some stimulus because you're fatigued a little bit, but it's not really enough weight to hurt you necessarily. You can always get hurt. Don't let me tell you that there's no risk involved, but it's very much more limited. But you're still getting enough stimulus that you have to try and be in good position and worry about your technique.
Yeah.
And doing something like that before your hypertrophy work with, be it block pulls or something like that, has been a good strategy for me lately.
That's a really cool pro tip. So as opposed to doing lower volume, where you're resting like 5 minutes between your sets of deadlifts and you're just going really hard, you're doing a couple extra sets, still a high percentage, low repetitions, but it's self-limiting by design. And it's on a movement that's already hard to recover on, dead stop. So it gives you those benefits. Maybe it takes more sets, obviously, but by the end of it, your lower back feels less beat up. And you have the specificity aspect compared to, say, doing an RDL or something.
Right. It's very, very good technical work. Another thing I like about it, because you're keeping the reps so low that you do have to do more sets, you're getting more first reps. And first reps for a power lifter, that's the only competition specific rep of any set that you do, because you only do 1 rep on the platform. So once you get into rep 2, rep 3, rep 4, however many reps you're doing, you're that many deviations away from being specific to your sport. So, whereas if you did 2 sets of 5 versus 5 sets of 2, well, 2 sets of 5, you're only getting 2 first touches. 5 sets of 2, you're going to get 5 first reps, 5 specific, touches to help with your technical work. And then by limiting that rest period, like I said, you're going to get that stimulus. You're going to get more effort out of a lower intensity loaded on the bar and save you some fatigue, but still going to put you in that, proximity to failure, if you will.
Now that you mention it, this can probably be done on any dead stop movement that's like a competitive lift. Like I imagine it would work really well for the overhead press.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, but probably less for the squat because you're starting from the top, right? Or even a bench press.
Yeah, you could still use it. I don't think it would be as effective as it is for deadlifts or overhead press, but it's still a tool that could be utilized for sure.
Absolutely.
For, like I said, for fatigue mitigation and for getting more first reps in.
I'm probably going to try that on pull-ups now.
Alex, I've got a client right now, and I have him do, right now, he's been doing 6 sets of 3 on pull-ups with 1 minute rest in between each set. And then I'll have him rest 5 minutes and do an AMRAP. And we've gone from like 8 on his AMRAP to 13 on his AMRAP after going from 4x3 to 6x3
Wow.
within like 4 weeks.
That's crazy.
Yeah.
Hey, you're onto something, Dennis.
I can't take credit. I got it from the concept from Tom Shepard, a British powerlifter. He coaches his wife, Naomi Shepard. She is one of the top women powerlifters in the world. He mentioned it on Dave Tate's podcast, and I kind of took it and ran with it. And it's been working great for me and great for my clients.
Awesome. So would you say like this is speed work 2.0? Like this is the modern way?
Yeah, if you want to frame it like that, it's a little more intensity than traditional speed work, but I think that's where the magic kind of lies, because it lends itself to more specificity, and you can get more of a hypertrophy stimulus because your proximity to failure is going to be closer than with traditional speed work.
Awesome. So speaking of proximity to failure, in the hypertrophy world, nice jug, by the way.
Oh, man. That was
You're
good.
mogging me right now. So in the hypertrophy world, it's been stated that you either want to train directly at failure or really close to it. Whereas I've heard some strength athletes say that lower RP training is actually better or preferred in many cases because you minimize fatigue and you can dial in your technique and you're still getting some effective reps, but you can also use a higher percentage, for example. So like, I don't know if you've seen Johnny Candido's video on how RPE like 6 is very good for powerlifters. What are your thoughts on RPE training and auto regulation? Did you incorporate that to reach your all-time best? And when you're working with clients, do you waive that in any kind of way, or do you prefer to just go balls to the wall, or just like a close range to failure? Let's say 1 to 3 RIR or something like that.
You've got to define your goals, and for powerlifting and for just adding weight onto the bar, you don't have to go near failure. It's not necessary. It's probably, not optimal to be training towards failure, at least on your competition lifts. You want your competition lifts to be technically sound. You still want them to be challenging, of course, but yeah, I would be in agreement there. For powerlifting, for just getting absolutely stronger, especially when peaking, you don't want to be going at failure at all on your main movements. As far as RPE training in general, I've dabbled with it some. I've used it in my own training a little bit here and there. It wasn't anything that was instrumental for me. I still train block linear, but with auto regulation with that, I would want to hit, week 1, 315, 5x5, week 2, 335, 5x5, week 3, 355, 3x5, or whatever the case may be. If on a day I wasn't feeling it or something like that, instead of going to an RPE or whatever, I would just dial back the weights and take what was there.
Okay.
Usually wasn't an issue. I think with block linear, a lot of people get overzealous, and that's why they think it doesn't work or they hit a wall. I don't think they program intelligently enough and conservatively enough to make it happen. But as far as my clients, I'll use it as a limiter. I don't really use RPE training a whole lot, but last week was the first week I turned one of my guys loose on bench press, and I told him, I said, I want you to work up to a heavy single at RPE 9 or 105 kilos, whichever one comes first.
Okay.
So I'll use that as a limiter, and then I'll use it to cap sets. So if I have him, doing 5 sets of 3, and then after your 5th set, I want you to rest for however many minutes, and then I want you to do an AMRAP to an RPE 8, or leave to RIR, however you want to say it. And that's something I define with each one of my clients. If this client likes using the term RIR, or this client likes using the term RPE, we'll define what we're using them as individually. And two different things can mean the same thing for 2 different clients.
True.
It's just important. As long as you and your client know what you're communicating, it really doesn't matter what you call it semantically. But that's kind of how I use RPE. I use it as a cap in most cases for my clients, and I still train most of my people very much percentage-based. A lot of references to Perlepin's chart. It works, man. It's something that works, and if once we develop that relationship and we get a little deeper into it and I kind of know them, and some people are overshooters by nature, and you'll tell them you want an RPE 8 at this set or whatever, and they send you back a clear right at failure and RPE 8 with a misgroove, bro. So it just depends on the client as to if it's something that will utilize like that, or if there's somebody I have to really hold back, then I don't want to kind of leave them up to their own devices.
Gotcha. And in terms of percentage-based training, do you make them test their 1 rep max to establish that, or do you kind of estimate?
Generally, most people that come to me, they'll already have videos on their Instagram or something, and I ask in my intake questionnaire, what their 1 rep maxes are. And in addition to that, before we get working together, I'll have them send me a current, not necessarily a 1 rep max, but a hard working set of 3 to 5 or something like that. And based on what they told me on their 1 rep max, what I see on the video,
it's true or not.
Yeah, I can get a good feel for it. And I'm going to be conservative with what I program off their max anyway. And, once we get going and get a couple months in, I can then see, what to turn them loose on and what to hold them back on.
Oh, okay. So that means like someone's 70% can actually be 60. But if you see it in the footage pretty quickly, then you can quickly ramp it up as well.
Right. And I put everybody I sign on, like their first month is going to be a conditioning block. That's something that I don't waver on. I'm going to get you in the shape that I need you in for me to train you how I want to train you. And that's not something that I negotiate at all. And I tell everybody up front, I require 2 months upfront payment because that first month is going to be a hard conditioning block and you're going to hate me. And I've had people quit before. So that's just something I kind of learned along the way that, well, if I want them to not waste my time and me not waste their time, like I'm going to require the 2-month commitment. And that first month is going to be a conditioning suck fest.
There's a theme going on here with conditioning. So tell me that, what does a conditioning block look like? Like the guys that are coming to you, I'm guessing their primary goal is to just get brutally strong. So what exactly would you make them do in 1 whole month of conditioning? Like, surely it's not just GPP every workout, right?
No, it's pretty specific. So I've got a client sheets right here. His week 1, day 1, I had him squat 4 sets of 5 reps with 3 minutes rest, then do a 5th set for as many as he can till he felt like he could do two more and then stop there. Then he had SSB squats after that, a very light percentage with a 4x3 with 1 minute rest.
What do you consider as a light percentage?
His max squat coming to me is 180 kilos, and on this SSB, after his competition squat, I had him doing 80 kilos. So it is
okay.
Yeah. We're talking sub 50% here. 4x3 with 1 minute rest, and then take a 5-minute rest and do an AMRAP. And that one I had him do a true AMRAP. Then I had him do some lunges after that, 3x10, minimal rest again, 2 minutes rest, then accessories. And what we did throughout the block stayed looking very much like that. And that's just 1 day. It's a 4-day week on my month 1. Day 2 is upper body. Then day 3 would be another lower body, and day 4 another upper body. And what we would do, we would just work the sets up and work the rest periods down. So by week 4, we added a little bit of weight, not much. So week 1 was 107.5 kilos. By week 4, it was 110 kilos, but he was only taking 60 seconds rest between sets instead of 3 minutes rest. So that's what I like to use because they are coming to me mainly for powerlifting and getting strong. So we can keep it condition specific for powerlifting by increasing either sets or reps and reducing rest time. And I like the rest time reductions. A lot of powerlifters take way too much time in between their sets. And you see a lot of powerlifters gas at meets, come deadlift time. So that's the most specific way to get somebody in powerlifting shape for powerlifting is reducing the rest sets and increasing the sets and or volume.
Wow. It's interesting because now, like you said, it seems like the total opposite is being preached. And even I'm somewhat guilty of this in the sense that I used to be a low rest interval kind of guy. I would do a lot of sets, low rest, 1 to 2 minute stops. And now it's like 3 to 5 minimum, right? But that's how I built my base, right? So it's not like I neglected that aspect. But there's some guys who never once experimented with that. It was just straight into the long rest. Some of them is 8 to 10 between sets, and they have no comprehension of what it's like to be completely out of breath and then having to go again. So you establish that in month 1. It sets them up work capacity wise, and you find out if they're tough enough to handle what you're going to give them. Because
Right.
if you can't handle a conditioning phase, how are you going to do some heavy ass weight for the prescribed amount of volume?
And then, of course, as time goes on, and like this guy in particular, we're getting up around 90% now. I'm certainly not having him do sets with 1 minute rest, with
Yeah,
90%,
exactly.
of course. But he's in great condition, and I still do. I program his rest intervals, and like today, he's doing bench press. I think at 87.5%, and he's resting 4 minutes in between his main sets today. But when he gets to his lighter incline sets afterwards, those are 2 minute rests in between those sets. If you look at powerlifters now, just in general, they look like athletes. They're taking conditioning and things more serious, and what we're finding is that with better conditioning comes better recovery, and with better recovery comes the ability to push a little bit harder. And you save those bigger rest periods for when you're peaking and you really need the recovery to really dial it in. And numbers are shooting up across the board. Then, on the drug tested side with IPF and USAPL, because people are saying, well, the numbers are going up because the drugs are getting better and the whippy bars and this and that. Well, they're still using stiff bars in USAPL and IPF, and those numbers are still going up too. And it's not just drugs and equipment.
I agree. People are going to say it's genetics. I think it's just better programming. People have been at this for so long now. Even some of the top coaches and competitors from back then have evolved the way they deal with their clients and even for themselves. So it's just refining, because powerlifting is, I don't want to, relatively new, but not really in the sense it's been around for a while. But the modern scene, at least,
Right.
raw, can we say the last 10 years where things have been dialed in?
Yeah, I would agree with that. There's some genetic component because it's more popular. So just the overall amount of competitors, you're going to see more outliers just by volume of number of competitors. But absolutely, it's the training protocols, the diet, the nutrition. Like I said, a lot of these powerlifters look like athletes now, especially you look in like the middleweight classes. On the drug tested side, these dudes look like they just came off the football field or got done competing in a track meet.
Well, there's a lot of trash talk about powerlifters and their physiques, and of course I'm guilty,
Right.
But I will say, if you go to a meet, and I've only been to two, I'm not seasoned here, they do look good in real life. When you see them putting up 400 pounds on the bench or mid 300s, they don't look that different from natural bodybuilders in terms of sheer muscle mass. The shape might not be there, the structure,
Right.
but the lean body mass is certainly there. And if they were to switch over to bodybuilding, it wouldn't take long at all before they look pretty darn good. And that's basically what I did. Not that I was a powerlifter, but I focused on strength development, just being the jack of all trades, and then looked pretty darn good when I shredded down.
Yeah.
So,
Especially your back, like holy shit. Like I told you, I said, man, those back pictures, I would be plastering those everywhere. I'd be
thank
milking
you.
those for the next 5 years. But I made a video on powerlifters. Like we train for hypertrophy. A lot of powerlifters, do hypertrophy training. It's just not to shape our muscles. It's just to make our muscles bigger for the movements. So we're not looking to proportion our physiques or make our biceps head pop or anything like that. But we're just the muscles involved in the bench press, the pecs, the shoulders, the triceps. We're just trying to make those bigger. We're trying to make our quads and our glutes and our hams bigger. We're not averse from hypertrophy training.
Yeah.
It's just not for the sake of shaping or proportioning our body.
Yeah, you're growing the specific muscles, the primary movers for that lift. And if there's a lagging area that doesn't contribute to that lift, well, it doesn't matter. Like I've heard some powerlifters say, don't worry about hamstrings because you don't use hamstrings when you squat. Therefore, it doesn't matter if they're flat. Now you can say the hamstrings will help you when you deadlift. That's true. But if you're only doing conventional deadlifts, or let's say RDLs, you never got that isolated function. You might not have the sweep, but your hamstrings are still super freaking strong.
Right, exactly.
But visually, it won't look that way.
Right. Yeah, and that's the whole thing. And then, like you said, if they were to take their muscle mass and then try to dial it in as you did, the results speak for themselves.
Thank you. To me, man, the weighted pull-ups, but that's not even powerlifting. You see, like if I wouldn't have done that, if it would have been deadlifts only, for example, my back would have never looked like that. So
Right.
That's why, especially when we bring it to general strength, I feel like that's where the aesthetic refinement really shines, because now it's not just some select muscles. Like when I look at a powerlifter, what I notice is they have very thick spinal erectors,
Yeah.
watermelon pecs, you know. So it makes me laugh when people say that the bench press is not optimal for pec development, because any strong bencher that I've seen, it has pretty crazy development there. And when you
Right.
compare it to natural bodybuilders, I would say it's exactly the freaking same, including the ones that are doing all those converging chest pressing machines and everything that's optimal. Well, as far as I'm concerned, when the silver era invented the bench press, you look at all those guys' pecs compared to the best natural bodybuilders of today, basically identical. Like I feel
Right.
like the pecs is that one area where not much improvement has been made since even the 70s, I would say.
Yeah, that's it's obviously been one of my main features. I've gotten interested in bodybuilding lately, with the how it's defined now in the natural scene, because somebody would say bodybuilding and my mind just goes to IFBB, and
Yeah, yeah.
I respect what those guys do in their scenario, and I know they work hard and stuff, but it just doesn't really appeal to me personally. So I always just wrote off bodybuilding. Thankfully, this new wave of natural bodybuilders is opening a lot of people's eyes.
Sure.
But yeah, my pecs have been great, and it's just been sheerly by benching heavy, benching often, benching to near failure for years and years and years. And then, now starting to, I've thrown in some dips and starting to toy with some other variations a little bit. And, there's maybe even a little more gains on the table left that I've not been
Yeah,
aware of. But we're
the
talking
dips.
about, splitting hairs at that point to that fine tuning, which is often what gets discussed on YouTube, is that last 10, 5, 1%, when 90% of everything else is very much the same meat and potatoes for all of
True.
us.
Yeah, and that's also when you look at programming, you'll see a lot of elite lifters saying that this is the best way to train because this is how I'm doing things right now, or like this is what I recommend. But then when you look at their entire journey,
Yep.
oftentimes documented, it's the complete opposite. So it's like what you're saying kind of contradicts what you did to get results, including on the dieting side. Like, oh, just you don't have to bulk. I realized that I wasted my time gaining all that weight. I could have gotten here without it. And it's like, but you didn't.
Right.
And there's a reason why, because
Yeah,
it's funny how we forget our roots. And the
we
longer
we
you go into
do.
this, you don't look at the journey.
For example, if somebody started off training conjugate, very by the book conjugate, and they did it for 5 or 6 years, and then they changed to a block periodization setup. Well, they've never trained block periodization before. So there's going to be some novel stimulus that comes along with
100%.
that just by chain. And then, oh my God, I was at this plateau. I was benching 350 pounds and I couldn't get past it, but I switched from conjugate to block linear, and now I'm benching 400. Whereas if you flipped it, if they would
It would have been the
start at
same thing
block
in reverse.
linear and got to 350 and then switched to conjugate and got to 400, well, they'd be preaching conjugate. Oh, it's
Yep.
conjugate. The only reason I got 400 pounds is because of conjugate. Meanwhile, you spent 5 years building that base on another style,
Exactly.
and that doesn't mean it didn't work, because obviously it got you, there. You just needed something. You needed to change a variable. That's where, late intermediate advanced happens, is when what your tried and true stuff was doing, it's not that it stops working. You just got to change the variables. And a lot of people, you could stay in the same style and change variables, but people are too married to what they've been doing, so
Yeah.
they have to change styles completely for the variables to change.
Yeah, that's a good point. Especially when you've milked every aspect of a given system. It's like, what more can you do to it? It's crazy how there's always like a flip, like the pendulum is always swinging. And it's like, you got results doing this one thing, and all of a sudden it's worthless. You completely switch over. But, I think the truth lies somewhere in the middle. And
Absolutely.
again, it's about doing the opposite, honestly. Same when we talk about developing strength. Like if you're really good at wide grip pull-ups, switch over to close underhand, and just that will boost your PRs, or vice versa. You
Right.
know, so it's not because the other way was inferior; it's just that you didn't tap into it yet.
Yeah. That new novel stimulus, that change of variables, and that's what I hope people can see nowadays. That it took me a while to realize, and I'm sure you as well. It took some time. That instead of being dead set on this is the way, just kind of having your eyes open and taking from the other ways that are different than how you train. And well, what do I see from this system that I think would
Mm-hmm.
benefit me, and apply it to your own methods, and evolving your own sort of personalized training system over the years,
For sure.
taking a little bit, from this person you get your rice, from this person you get your beans, from this person you get your meat, this person you get your vegetables, and next thing you know, you've got a full meal.
That's brilliant. And I think that's the real way that someone develop an authentic training system that's not only fully customized for themselves, but they can actually give back to the community in the way that's really unique, because you're borrowing from all the best masters,
Right.
Take a bit of strongman, take a bit of powerlifting, a bit of calisthenics, a bit of bodybuilding. Okay, conjugate, linear, like just try everything, or at least learn. Even if the guy has a completely different viewpoint from you, listen to what he has to say, and maybe something will click. Because if you just stay in that one box, you're stuck there. And I was guilty of this in the conjugate system. Okay, who am I going to listen to? Louis and Matt Wenning. All right, who else?
Right.
So,
right. I was the same. I was, there's Mark Ripito and there's Ed Cohen. And
exactly.
that's who I've got.
Can never stop learning in this
Right.
game. That's basically the secret to long-term success.
Absolutely.
Speaking of that, what are some recommended resources? Who are some trainers or guys that have really helped you in your journey to getting to this elite strength?
Anybody that's interested in powerlifting, Brian Carroll has a book called 1020 Life. I would recommend the second edition. He's a longtime geared powerlifter, which is funny because I've been known for throwing a little shade at that side of the powerlifting community. But he's a smart dude, great dude. And his book, it's not overly scientific. It's very, simple, if you will. It's got, if I'm weak in this area, or if my deadlift is slow at this part, what is the corrective movement to help bring it up? It's got templates and things like that. That's an absolutely great book to pick up that I would recommend for anybody looking to get into powerlifting. That's something that will teach you how to train yourself without being tied to any system. He does have his own system in there, but he says, hey, these methods can be applied elsewhere. You do not have to run my template. It's a great book. I'm currently reading Fred Hatfield, Power Scientific Approach. It's so many great tidbits in here. I like Fred Hatfield because he has a PhD, but he is also an absolutely monster of a powerlifter in his heyday. And he takes little pot shots at academia within the book, which it's funny. There's so many now. The Noble Natty community, Natural Hypertrophy, my man Jeffrey, Paris, Bald Omni Man, going back to some of the OGs, Johnny Candido. He's got just a bunch of gold on his channel if you go back and dig through it. Omar Esoff, of course. I'm sorry for people who I'm not going to name. I was coached early on by a guy named Dustin Reed. He's not YouTube famous or anything, but he trained directly under Sam Bird, and so I got a lot of philosophy, some rundown from Sam Bird. If you guys don't know, Sam Bird was a long-time world record holder in the squat. He squatted 915 at 220, and that record held for, I want to say, like 5 or 6 years before Yuri broke it. And Sam Bird, he took a lot of Hatfield's training. Shout out Coach Dustin. My first deadlift plateau, I was stuck at like 630 pounds for probably 2 years. And he took me from 630 at 288 to 661 at 270 over a year. Drug-free, intermittent fasted that whole year. People say you can't make gains intermittent fasting. I was intermittent fasting that whole year, even while I was bulking on the tail end of that year.
Yeah.
There's an endless number of resources out there. But as far as, like, if you're a powerlifter, that 1020 Life book is amazing, and that's probably what I would recommend to most powerlifters.
Gotcha. I want to know, like, what are the personal bests that you're most proud of?
We'll just run down like the major lifts. So I've squatted 775, I've benched 550, I've deadlifted 705. I have front squatted 550, and that was bare knees, no knee sleeves or nothing on. I've strict overhead press 350. I'm really proud of my 48-inch box jump at 288. I think that was cool. I've done a 339-pound log clean and press. I've Larson pressed 5 plates, 500 pounds plus, and a bunch of times. I can't not say Larson press.
For sure.
But the deadlift, I had to work the hardest on the deadlift. When I very first decided to jump into powerlifting, I wanted to squat 600, bench 500, and deadlift 700. The squat came really easy. That didn't take hardly any time at all. The bench press, I was already benching mid fours when I started powerlifting. So I was close to that. But the deadlift, given my build, it took the longest, and it was something that There was one point I thought I wasn't going to see. I almost deadlifted it in 2017 at a meet. I ended up totaling 1,950 pounds in the meet, and I got 700 pounds, like half an inch from lockout, and I dropped it. My grip failed, and that was very disappointing because it flew off the floor. But that's one thing. I've never had a weak grip, but when you're up 300 pounds and you're 5'11", your hands get really puffy, and it is hard to hang on to that bar, and you're sweaty and it's hot. And the finally getting 700 in competition, which I ended up getting it in a deadlift only, and then like I said, I did 705 in the gym. But that one took me. That was the last box to check for powerlifting. Took me the longest. I had to work the hardest to get it, and it was the one that, you know, I questioned would I ever get it, because the other two came, you know, pretty naturally and pretty easy.
Yeah. Well, I think when lift does not come easily to you, and you learn how to break through plateaus and finally hit that pinnacle, is when you're a different kind of coach. And the advice you give is going to be very unique because it's hella specific.
Absolutely.
So, speaking of your deadlift plateau, like what are some of the things that really helped you out the most? Because that's we're talking around a 70-pound jump or so.
Yeah, you're gonna like this because you know your conjugate background, speed work, man. I never,
work, really?
Yeah, I never did speed work. You know, I just, you know, block linear and, you know, work heavy and then reset and work back up. And when I got with my coach there, that whole year that I worked with him, and during the off-season phase, we never touched more than 405 off the ground. I don't think we ever did more than, I think 505 was the biggest set of block pulls in terms of just sheer weight on the bar. And it wasn't until I think we did a 6-week peak. So 6 weeks out, I hadn't touched over 4 plates off the floor. I hadn't touched over 5 plates off blocks. And he programmed 570 for 2 sets of 1 6 weeks out. And that 570 absolutely flew. I mean, it just flew. I was like, holy shit. I was scared. I hadn't touched it in a while. You know, and we just worked on speed. Compensatory acceleration training was the overwhelming majority of that off season. So a lot of that kind of 70%-ish range, just moving the bar with as much force as you possibly could. And that's what ultimately, you know, helped me see the light of, you know, both speed work and partial range of motion movements. I was never a big fan of partial range of motion movements either. That was the first time I ever did any partial range of motion movements, was when he programmed those block pulls.
Wow.
And it ended up helping me a ton.
And they were submaximal block pulls to top it off.
Yeah. Most people think, you know, overload with partial range of motion, but these were submaximal.
Wow.
Well, we got into a little bit of higher volume stuff because he would, and it's something that I've adopted as well. We would have, like, you know, sets of 3 to 5, as much force as we could generate, trying to be fast. And then we would take a big rest and then do an AMRAP at the end to kind of try to stimulate some muscle growth and stuff. And it ended up being a really good system for me.
Very interesting. So this kind of brings me on to 2 topics. First of all, you weren't doing overload deadlifts, yet you got an overload PR, quote unquote. So how has that shifted your mindset on super maximal weights? And what are your thoughts on getting more out of less weight? Because clearly you've done it on deadlifts, you did it with Larson pressing. So what is your viewpoint on submaximal versus super maximal for getting strong?
Actually, I ordered a book that won't be out until October, but from Tom Shepard and Christian Thibodeau. You know, I mentioned Tom Shepard earlier, but it's about overload training. So I'm looking forward to that. I'm very, very, very experienced with submaximal work. I have seen great results with it. You get lots of good technical practice. You're still generating maximal force, but your recovery is great because you're not using a lot of load. Obviously, at some point, you're going to have to put load in there if you know you're going to go for a new 1 rep max or a PR or something like that. So you're going to have to work a block of that in somewhere. But the submaximal work for technique, for force development, conditioning, it can check a lot of boxes with great success. As far as overload stuff, I'm not super well versed into that. My last meet prep is probably the first time I really got into overload stuff. and it was just doing heavy negatives on my bench press going into the meet. So I've only really done one training block with overload stuff.
Really?
I worry so much about my lower back these days. I'm scared to overload it. So I don't know if that's something that I'm even going to dabble in. I'm looking forward to this book though, and I've incorporated some heavy holds. I'm training heavy incline bench press right now, and I don't have training partners at the gym. Otherwise, I would do the full negative. But I've been doing heavy holds with Supermaximal weight there. So I'll see how that translates. But this is only my second training block using them. So I really, it wouldn't be fair for me to have an opinion on them because I'm not really utilizing that method a lot.
Okay, fair enough. Well, I guess it just goes to show that you can get to a high level without overloading. That proves one thing. But I'm interested to see how your thoughts will change or stay the same, depending how this goes. Once you
I'm
read the
not
book and
opposed
experiment
to
more.
overload training. I've seen people use it and have success. So obviously it works out there. I'm just not experienced with it myself to have a personal opinion.
Well, that's going to be awesome to see. But
yeah, man.
Going back to submaximal stuff, so what are some of your favorite low percentages to work with? And do you always use low reps when doing this with just more sets? Or will you do like a traditional 3 sets of 6 to 10, like bodybuilding style?
So early on, with sort of the block periodization, I would start with like a 3x10 phase and then move down to like a 5x5 phase and then down to a 3x3 phase and do it like that. As I progressed and got deeper into it, I prefer keeping the reps lower and the sets higher. And then if I wanted it to stimulate more hypertrophy, you could reduce the rest times to artificially make it feel heavier. And get yourself closer to failure as needed. But I prefer it that way for the specificity. Because again, those first touches are important for powerlifters. The force development, because keeping the reps low, every rep can be very uniform, very fast, very much consistent and looking the same. And if you need the volume, of course, you can add more sets. And I think just specific to powerlifters, that's probably a little bit more optimal. Again, we're splitting hairs getting into those small percentages, but if it matters to you, it matters to you. And if you're getting at that elite level, then it should matter to you. So I think that's the move, really, is to add sets versus adding reps, just to keep it specific and keep that rate of force very on the higher end of the power curve.
Gotcha. So in terms of those sets and reps, what are some common prescriptions that you would recommend that people can get started with right away?
Generally speaking, 65 to 75, up to 80%, near the end of a training block. 3 to 10 sets, depending upon what you need. 3 to 5 reps. And again, I would start on the lower end of sets and just add sets as needed. And then you want to keep your reps low because you want to keep them looking uniform, and you want to keep the rate of force with each rep high, and the longer a set goes on, the more fatigue will set in. And it's hard to also maintain position over, a set of 10 while just trying to absolutely throw the bar off your chest.
True.
Something like a bench press. So yeah, if you're getting started, somewhere between 3 and 10 sets, somewhere between 3 and 5 reps, I would start a block, 65 to 70%, and then, 80, depending upon who you are, maybe get a little high or into the lower 80 percentiles. But at that point, I would just look more towards decreasing rest times just to artificially make it feel heavier rather than actually, getting up into your percentages. At that point, you're not training submaximal anymore.
Yeah, as you increase the sets, not when you're just starting off.
Right.
Okay, cool. So that's kind of how you go about the periodization for most people. Just simple increasing the percentage by say 5, adding sets, but the reps are always low.
Generally speaking, but I do add AMRAPs like on the end of them. So they'll do 5x3 with 2, 3, 4 minutes rest, whatever the case is. Then I'll have them rest 5 minutes and then do an AMRAP. But if it's a competition movement, I'll have them leave reps in the tank because I don't want them going to failure on a competition movement. If it's an accessory movement, we might go to absolute failure, just depending upon who it is, what training block we're in, what phase we're in.
So you're really serious then about not distorting technique for the competition movements. Like you don't want those failure grinder reps.
No, I don't. Not for the competition movements. I don't.
Now,
I think the ability to grind it is an important ability to have, but I think that's a general ability that can be developed.
Yeah.
With other accessory lifts. I don't want them grinding. I want all of their competition lifts to be as close to their technically perfect as possible.
Yeah. Well, I'll agree on that in the sense that maxing out is a skill in itself, and the ability to grind is general.
Right.
And that's why when we talk about, say, the max effort method, it doesn't matter what exercise you pick. It's the fact that you have that slow movement velocity that it's just going to end up that way. But it'll translate, as long as you have the technique down, you'll be able to grind no matter what,
And that's something I think conjugate works well for people who pick up skills fast, like natural athletes. Conjugate is great for them. Somebody who's not their motor patterns, they don't pick up motor patterns as quick. It's not as good for them because they need to keep the motor patterns of whatever their specific movement is. So it's they can't be rotating movements all the time. Whereas somebody else, even me at this point, like my bench press, I could do variations only for the next 3 months, and it would take me like a week, and I'd have my bench technique back just because I've done it for so many years at this point. Some other people, they might have to bench twice a week just to keep their technique, because they're not very skilled in motor patterns.
Well, I think when you've been doing it for so long, it's almost impossible to lose the skill.
Yeah.
Like I just got back into standing overhead press, and I haven't done that exercise in probably a year now, and it's as if I never left it.
Right.
Because I began my programming with that exercise, so some stuff you just don't lose it. So that leads me on to an interesting question then. What are your thoughts on those who say technique work isn't really important for powerlifting because the big three are just brute forces of strength? It's not like Olympic lifting. They're relatively low skill. Like you can teach someone to conventional deadlift in a couple sessions, and you don't like an intermediate form might not be that much different from an advanced lifter's form. So like, what are your thoughts on people who overemphasize technique work or say that it's like really important, versus those who say, yeah, it doesn't matter, just get brutally strong at everything, just build your muscles, etc.
I agree. Powerlifting is very low skill. That's something you're not going to hear an argument on me from. I'm in 100% agreement with that. You look at something like golf, the other end of the spectrum, very low. I don't want to say low effort, but you don't have to be ridiculously strong to do it, but it is extremely highly skilled. And those guys got to play golf damn near every day to maintain. Whereas powerlifting, most people, you do the movements once a week and it's fine. As far as technical work not being important, kind of disagree there. It's certainly important. Obviously, you can hear by what we just talked about programming, I very much value good technique on all the reps. And it's not so much that the techniques are hard, it's maintaining your wherewithal and your technique with maximal loads on your back. It is a skill, and it's something that you don't want to be having to think about technique.
Right.
And in powerlifting, technique is what scores. So you just have to lift within the parameters of the rule set. So my perfect technique and your perfect technique, while we're built, me and yours is probably going to look very similar, but mine and a 6'5" lank lord, my perfect squat and his perfect squat is going to look very different, technically, but you need to practice technique so that it's thoughtless, and that's the big thing. I want technique to be thoughtless so that when you do approach these maximal loads and have maximal weight on your back or in your hands, you don't have to think about a cue. You don't have to think about tightening my lats. You don't have to think about squeezing my glutes or breaking the bar. You just go and perform, and that's why the technical repetitions are so important. Just to beat it into your body that this is how we move, and we don't have to think about it.
Gotcha. So what do you do when someone no longer thinks about executing the movement a certain way, but it's been wrong this whole time, or there's a style that's better for them? Like, for example, you'll see many people who have been using a close grip bench for their entire lifting journey, and they're realizing that they left poundages on the table and they want to slowly start widening things, but they've been doing this for like 5+ years. So how do you deal with someone who has perfected a technique that's suboptimal? You just work with it and try to develop those muscles as much as possible, or try to work in something that's more efficient on paper?
So you kind of got to ask them like what their goals are, not for the next training block, but for the next year, 2 years, 5 years.
Okay.
Because if they're only going to compete for another year or two, then run what you brung, dude. We're not going to change it. There's not quite enough time that we're going to optimize your lift for your leverages when you've already spent so much time, doing it, this way. We're just going to have to go with what's there and just milk whatever we can milk out of it. Now, if they do have the time and they do want to change, and they're okay with regressing at first, which is mentally that can be hard to do.
For sure.
That's the big part, is communicating that mentality that, hey, we're going to trade 50 pounds for now, but we're going to gain 100 pounds in 3 to 5 years. Whereas if we would have stayed the other way, we weren't going to trade off anything initially, but we were only going to gain 25 to 30 more pounds out of where we were at. So
Exactly.
it's that convincing the mind more than anything that regression is necessary for further progression.
I like that. So it's really about the long-term journey when you're talking about optimizing technique.
It has to be. It has to be, because with lifting weights and with other sports, you can see instant changes. With a jump shot technique in basketball, or kicking a soccer ball or football for my international friends. You can move this way 1 inch or that way 1 inch, and it makes all the difference in the world. And something like powerlifting or just recreational weightlifting, like your technique, you can change it, and maybe there's a little bit that can be gained instantly, but you're not going to make anything profound changes because building strength takes time.
Right. So then where do you draw the line between efficient, perfect technique and injuries? In the sense that sometimes using the strongest form, but it can also put more stress on the body.
Right. I think load management is the most important. I think that's the biggest factor, and using what form you can to score, points in whatever it is. In powerlifting, the total is the points. So, like I've told people, and I'm not suggesting anybody go out there and cap back their deadlifts, but you have two lifters in the same weight class. One does a picture perfect 500-pound deadlift, and the other person absolutely does this horrendous cap back 700-pound deadlift. That cap back person just won. It doesn't matter how ugly or not it looks.
Yeah, exactly.
I'm not going to suggest them train like that long term, and they should fix that, of course. But on the day, on the platform, scoring the most wins. But for long term training, yes, load management is absolutely key. Finding a form, trying to find that middle ground that allows you to move as much weight as possible, but also stay in a relatively safe position. Is going to be the best bet, because it is a marathon, and it's going to be a long-term thing. You're not going to come anywhere near your potential in the first 5 years or so. So you want to do everything you can to maximize that long-term potential. If you get to that point relatively injury-free, you're at an elite level now. You're competing with some of the best. Maybe then, try some of these extreme French low bars, or, things like that, or widening your grip if need be. And even some of those people, I've even noticed a lot of the bench specialists with the really high arches and the max legal grip. If you look at their off-season work, their grip's a little bit narrower.
Yeah.
They Larson press very often. So it's those things. It's having the tools in the tool shed. It's great to have them there, and knowing when to use them and how to use them.
Pull out, yeah.
Yeah. And I think that's the key. You want to be as healthy as you can for as long as you can, and pick your spots.
So in terms of the big three then, like what general form would you recommend? Like on the bench press, would you say medium grip? Squat, would you prescribe high bar or low bar? And deadlift, obviously that's just depending which one you're more built for. But what about the squat and the bench press specifically? What do you feel is most applicable to the average lifter?
That most people should just, look at whatever the textbook form is, and that's where they should start. All right. Like everybody should start with, you look in a book, this is a squat, and it's an Olympic style squat. It's probably going to be, your textbook squat, a pretty high bar position. There's not a lot of stress on your shoulders. You're squatting fully, almost ass to grass. Your feet are about shoulder width apart. Same with bench press, just a general, whatever your shoulder medium grip, give or
Yeah.
take, not a whole lot of arch, and getting proficient with those textbook ways of doing it. And then as, you get stronger, you'll kind of, your body will put you in the best position. Johnny Candido interviewed Dan Bell. Dan Bell had the biggest total wrapped and in sleeves, had the biggest squat at one point. I think he still has the biggest wrap squat, maybe. I'm not sure. Either way, Johnny asked, and he has a relatively narrow stance, which is unusual for a big guy that size squatting that much weight. And Johnny said, tell us about your narrow stance. How did you come about with that stance? And Dan Bell said, it's just comfortable and felt good.
There you go.
And that's going to be a lot of people. You're going to find that textbook form. That's how you're going to start. You're going to learn the quote unquote right way to do it. And then your body's going to put you in the right position. You're going to find what's comfortable for you. And that's how the meat and potatoes of your training should be what's comfortable for you and let you train for a long time while mitigating injury risk.
Yeah.
Then when you get to a point where you are, pretty elite, for whatever your capabilities are, at that point, if you want to look at some of these specialty stances or specialty grips and really trying to eke out those last 10, 5, 1%, finding ways to throw them in your training while still staying healthy, would be the way to go.
Yeah. I think that is some solid advice right there. And in terms of using these extreme techniques, this is really in a competitive environment. Like for general strength, or just like in general, it's not giving you more. You're just getting better at using.
You're not artificially adding weight on the bar, but you're artificially adding weight on the bar, just by changing the leverages or technique. You didn't get stronger. You just reduced your range of motion or increased your leverages or something like that. So yeah, for Gen Pop, unless you just want to show off for the gram or something, they're just really it's not necessary.
Yeah. So I guess it goes back to feeling natural and understanding that you don't need to overload your technique to get a great training stimulus.
Right.
But what I will say about that, so when you squatted your 770, was that with a low bar stance?
It was kind of a medium to high bar stance. Again, it's where the bar felt comfortable on me.
Okay.
It wasn't something like I'm going to go squat high bar or I'm going to go squat low bar. It was just, like I said, it's kind of a medium high bar, and that's just where it felt comfortable for me. Kind of my lower body, I would say, was doing kind of a low bar squat, but my upper body was doing more of a high bar squat, if that makes any sense. So the stance was kind of a little wide. The feet were pointed a little bit out. Shins were very vertical. There wasn't a lot of knees over toes action, but my upper body also stayed very upright. And that's like, just, I've got a long torso and I've got short limbs. And
it sounds like my technique, man.
Yep.
Actually, I had to force myself to start leaning forward, when I was building up my squat, or else it was exactly the way you just described. I'm like, oh, damn, that's familiar.
Right.
Yeah. But it's interesting because I've seen, like, I think Eric Lillibridge used to be a high bar squatter. And then when he switched to low bar, he noticed like a crazy jump or whatever. So it's really like the elites who reserve those final techniques. And by that point, they're already so strong and jacked that it doesn't really matter. And then you can, more so hypertrophy the muscles that contribute to that new technique, right?
Right.
But in terms of hypertrophy from these full range of motion lifts, right? Would you say that most of the time it's better to pause in the bottom? Like, is there a point in doing a touch and go squat or a touch and go bench? What should the standard be for those who want just general strength, but also maximize the muscle gains from those big movements?
Before like a month ago or whenever it was, Sam Sheethar made his video. I know Paris has talked about pausing everything in hypertrophy blocks. I had always touch and go'd my hypertrophy blocks with the understanding that I was getting more volume that way. And more volume, more gains, more growth. So it having heard Paris explain it, getting more of a stretch at the bottom with it being paused, more mechanical tension, that kind of dinged a light bulb in my head. So I'm not yet well equipped enough to go out on a limb and say one is better than the other, because I've only just now considered that the other is an option. Yeah, I've always, was volume as the driver of growth, and as long as you're getting close to failure,
Yeah,
and being a power lifter for so long,
it's
the
hard to undo
pause
that, eh?
reps were reserved for peaking and lower rep sets.
Mm,
You didn't think about doing that for high reps. You were just, you trying to get as much volume as possible, bro. So yeah, that's something I look forward to experimenting with in my own training after the meet, and being able to have my own thoughts on it better. But definitely, Sam first put it in my ear with his video, and then listening to Paris talk about it, like Paris explains things so well. Like I can say
he
something
does.
and I feel like I'm getting my point across, and then Paris can say the exact same thing. And it's like, why didn't I think to say it like that? But yeah, so that's I can't say one way or another right now. But it's definitely something I'm willing to try and looking forward to trying now.
Okay, well, that's gonna be really cool to see, and I agree about Paris. He's able to articulate things in a way that we've all felt, but didn't really know how to say it. And then all of a sudden, we can all explain it after, he put it out there. So
As he would say, expeditiously.
expeditiously, yeah. So pause reps you mostly reserve for competition. Now you can do it for more hypertrophy experiment anyway. What
Yep.
about dead stop reps, like pin pressing from the same position of your benching or your squatting, or instead of pins, let's say safety straps, if the argument is that the metal on metal is bad for the joints or whatever. So like, what are your thoughts on full range of motion dead stop work for building strength and even hypertrophy?
I think anything that makes something harder, it's going to give you that brutal strength, by nature of it. Especially like dead pin presses, which I did those in my training block leading up to my last meet too. I ended up dead pin pressing 440 pounds, and that's exactly what
Damn.
I ended up bench pressing at the meet. And this was the meet day was kind of a shit show, so I think there was more on the table there. But
Bro,
I
100%.
yeah, I think pin presses, anything like that, pin squats, anything where you can mechanically make a lift harder. I can definitely speak on it for strength. It's absolutely going to make your strength blow up, especially if you've gone a little bit of time without doing pin squats or pin presses, or if you've never done them at all, and if you're doing them for the first time. Get ready for the gains train, because it's coming. Again, something I've never considered for hypertrophy. That's always in my mind just been tied to strength and wanting to get stronger and making it mechanically harder, and generating strength and stuff. So can't say for hypertrophy, but again, taking that same logic that Paris applied to pauses, I'm sure you can apply it to this too,
Yeah.
and probably something that would be beneficial for most.
Yeah. When I think about it in terms of hypertrophy, you're still hitting the lengthened position, but at the same time, you're killing off any momentum. So that would be
Right.
the advantage of that. And reducing muscle damage, but you're still working the hardest position. And you can still hit failure. So it doesn't really matter that you're not holding the position per se. Maybe we can say it's slightly less hypertrophic, but I would say the fact that it's easier to recover from, potentially,
Right.
can still make it a viable option.
Absolutely.
But for strength, if someone just did their competition movements and then pin pressing on the side, but no pause work, right? Would that have a similar training effect? Or like if someone only did pin work exclusively, no touch and go, just pause and pin, how would that then translate to their touch and go? Like, what's the proper blending of pausing, touch and go, and dead stop in your experience?
It goes back to the individual. How neurotic are they with their skill acquisition, their motor patterns? How experienced are they? Like me and you could ditch bench press and do these exclusively and go right back to bench press. And again, it wouldn't take long to get back to bench press feeling natural, if it even took more than a session. For a newer lifter, if they plan on competing, I want the meat and potatoes of their work to be specific and paused, and then treating like a pin press or something like that, or touch and go benches on those days, as kind of secondary movements. I wouldn't want to call them like accessories, because they're still going to be kind of main work, but they'd be secondary to the main movement. And again, it's something where I'll take a lifter, and if it's their secondary day on bench, but I need them to make those neurological gains, I might program them 3 singles at 85% on bench, so that they're still getting some neurological adaptation there before they're doing their touch and go work, or before they're doing, their pin press, or whatever the case may be, where those 385% singles aren't going to take anything out of them at all. But it's going to keep the movement patterns fresh in their brain.
Gotcha. Speaking of the singles, very quickly, when you program them, is it usually 3, just like in a meet, just so you're grooving that in, or is it 1 single, then you move on to your back off set? Like, how much volume do you need on that?
It depends on the lifter and on the day, and there's so many variables. Generally speaking, if I'm doing something like that with a particular lifter, it's going to be, depending upon, again, who they are, what their secondary movement needs are for the day, it'll be between 1 and 5 singles, between 80 and 92.5%, depending upon where we are in proximity to a meet or something of that nature. Generally, it's somewhere in that range, just depending upon where we are in training.
And when you do the singles, is it always the competition style?
In this instance, we're trying to keep the competition movement fresh, so it's going to be competition grip and stuff. I really, with my secondary movements and things like that outside of the competition lifts, they're generally going to already be warm going into those, from doing these singles, so we don't really do heavy singles on those.
Gotcha.
We'll still get up into heavier percentages, again, depending upon the block.
Yeah.
And if a lifter, for instance, if they're a non-competitor, which I coach those as well, and they say, hey, I want to improve my close grip 1 rep max, then we'll treat their close grip like
as if it's that.
lift.
Exactly.
And then it would be subbed in as that single. They would be doing it that way.
Gotcha. And in terms of the secondary work, and then all the accessories that follow, do you try to feed into the main movement, or is it muscular weakness based, or a combination of both? Like, if you're trying to build just a regular comp bench press, is your secondary press going to be another flat bench of some kind, or would it be like a different angle? And then what comes after that, are you then going to isolate the muscles that contribute to the bench? Like, is it a chain where everything has to be specific to that first movement that you did?
It's going to depend, again, on the lifter's weaknesses, both muscular and or perceived with their movement. So like my guy right now, triceps are what I perceive to be lacking a little bit. So we do, he'll do his regular bench, and then we're doing close grip incline for some volume after that, to kind of build those the triceps up a little bit. His upper back needs a little work, so the pull-ups are in there.
Nice.
On a given day. On one of his other days, we had some curls in there for a training block, but the fatigue got a little bit much. We were kind of throw a little bit of the kitchen sink at him, because he mentioned, he wanted to improve his total, but he also wanted to look bigger, his upper body. So we've had to dial back a little bit there. But yeah, it depends. For competitors, it's everything stems off the competition movements. Whatever's weak on the competition movement, and it usually is a combination of muscular and movement pattern, is the weaknesses that will expose themselves. And with the secondary movement, like I said, for bench press, he's doing a lot of close grip on his secondary stuff, be it from an incline. He's doing a little bit of OHP. Very, very light work on one of his bench days at the end. So just trying to build those muscles around there and bring up the weak points, but it does stem off that main movement.
Gotcha. A few things I'll say about that. So your client, you're programming him the overhead press. So what are your thoughts on those who say it doesn't carry over to the row? You knew I was going to ask this.
Oh, I knew it was coming.
You already knew.
Yep. Personally, anecdotally, I've not seen much, if any, carryover from overhead press to my bench press. Vice versa, I have seen some carryover. I think the very first time I maxed out on OHP was like 250, and I was benching mid 400s. Never done an OHP before. There's
Crazy,
no
man.
other explanation. I would venture to say that if somebody did only OHP and they went to bench, their bench would be significantly higher than if they hadn't. So I'm not going to deny that there's any carryover at all, especially beginners, intermediates. Like, you're just getting stronger and everything's going to carry over at a higher level. And this, I want to specify this, where we're really getting to the weeds here. The reason why I said I don't like OHP for advanced bench pressers is because there are too many variations that do have better carryover to bench press, and that you would just be using energy on that OHP that would be taking away from Larson press, close grip bench press, floor press, single board press, incline bench press. All of these things, are more direct carryover to that. Doesn't mean I think OHP is bad. Doesn't mean I think an advanced bench presser can't put it in their program somewhere. I do find that doing them at a lower percentage, and for some higher rep work, just for shoulder health, can be beneficial. But just for direct carryover, I just think that there's too many better variations that one could pick from to the bench press.
Fair point. You only have so much energy to use. And by that point, you're so strong that recovery is kind of finite to begin with. So if you're going to dedicate, some extra volume, it might as well be something that is going to give you better carryover. And even though the overhead press can do that to a certain extent, it's not to the same level. So it's about.
And again, this is for the very advanced.
Like you're at a really high level here.
Yeah, intermediate lifters like don't not do OHP because I said it's going to take away energy from your bench press work. Absolutely do OHP, but I think once you get to a certain strength level on your OHP, and you have that baseline, anything extra isn't going to add enough to your bench to matter as much as like adding to your close grip bench would, or adding to your close grip Larson press, or something of that nature, or your floor press, for example. They would just have much better carryover for the energy cost.
Yeah, that's true. Like right now, I'm focusing on my anterior delt press, and I want to get it to like 275, 3 plates. I have no idea how that's going to carry over in terms of benching, but I would say that compared to my all-time best, it's probably not that much higher than what it used to be on the flat bench. I can maybe do 410, 420 tops with a peak, but my overhead press has improved exponentially since then. So I can kind of see the diminishing returns somewhat, but to me, I don't mind because I'm looking at it in a bodybuilding context. And also that maybe it won't help the flat angle as much, but it could be good for my, say, 60-degree incline, right?
Absolutely. And that's something I think the further the deviation of the angle, generally speaking, the less carryover you're going to have.
Okay.
So I would, as in terms of flat bench, like I said, Larson press, close grip bench, floor press, these things are going to be better, even like a low board press. And then once the angles go, incline's going to be slightly less effective, seated OHP slightly less effective, and then standing OHP even less effective than that.
Gotcha. So then what, for your clients or just yourself, at what angle do you cap the incline at? 45 degrees?
I don't even have a measure. I think the incline I'm using is 45 degrees. It's whatever. It's like there's 5 holes on it, and it's in hole 3. Hole 2, I'm tempted to try hole 2 just because it's an even closer angle to the bench press. But we just got these new incline benches that have this new hole on them. The old incline benches we had, the lowest angle was like right there, right at 45 degrees.
Gotcha.
And I was already mid training block. So that's something I want to experiment too, because I've never used like a really low incline.
Yeah, that's probably like a 15-degree incline then. Well, it's nice when you get to experiment with quality equipment, and it's including a power rack when you got multiple holes, not just when it's like from one jump to the next and it's hard to unrack it. And I think guys would be surprised how much that can throw off their technique and even strength for that matter.
Oh, starting position is huge. Yeah, that's an absolute game changer.
Speaking of which, for benching, should one stay tight the entire time, including at the lockout, or are you allowed to move those scaps a bit, especially on the unrack?
again, if you're comfortable protracting a little bit and it makes your unrack more efficient to you, and you're not putting yourself in a bad position, I don't see nothing wrong with it. I like to try to stay as tight as possible. And when I had somebody to give me a handoff, I would never even consider protracting.
Yeah, no point there.
But I do bench by myself. I lift by myself. I've unracked and benched 5 plates plus by myself more times than I can count, and I had to protract a little bit to get the bar moving off of there. And it is what it is. You got to do what you got to do. It's never seemed to negatively affect me over all the years. I've benched a lot of weights. I think that's another one of those things people major in the minors.
Agreed.
Yeah. If you got to protract a little bit to get it off, as long as you can stay in a safe position, that's what you got to do and make it happen.
Okay. So what about just one more thing about this, the topic of the scapulohumeral rhythm. There's a lot of people saying now that you shouldn't do anything with your scaps or your back for that matter, that you should just be 100% flat on the bench, loose, just press and let your body do what it's naturally supposed to do.
Yeah, I don't see any of the best bench pressers doing that, so I'm
that's
not
the
going to do
problem
that.
that argument. Like I could see, the physiological reasons why that could make sense. But then when you look at the real world, at the best benchers, none of them are doing that. And you can
Right.
say, well, it's because they're powerlifters, they're trying to lift the most weight. But is it just that? Surely they would use a technique that keeps them injury free for the long term. Like if this technique that you're suggesting is so good on longevity, then why are none of the top guys doing it? So that's
Like
a red
I
flag.
will say, like throw it in a training block and do it that way.
Yeah, exactly.
It's not gonna. I don't think it's something that's inherently dangerous or anything like
No.
that. And it might be beneficial to some. But if you're trying to be the best bencher you can possibly be and move as much weight as you can possibly move, no, it's not it.
Yeah, I see it the same way as you, as a variation. So I like
Yeah,
the no
exactly.
retraction Larson press because now it's like using a cambered bar bench. You get so much arm bend that it's another 20 pounds lost
Right.
off your 10 rep max. So I find it valuable as a self-limiting variation, but I wouldn't use that for my traditional set, especially if I have leg drive in there. Like then I'm gonna have a nice arch. I'm gonna stay tight, and I think
Right.
that's just intuitive as you start putting up these heavy ass weights.
Yeah, we're in agreement there. Yeah, you use that as a variation, but yeah,
Variation, and that's
yeah,
it.
yep,
Okay, cool. You spoke before of upper lower for I think it was your clients. Is that
right.
generally how you program? Is that your preferred training split?
Yeah. So for the most part, for me, I train 4 days a week. My conditioning block for my clients is 4 days a week. Now this particular client that I showed you, he's doing 5 days a week now. But for me personally, I do 4 days a week. Most of the time, it's lower first and then upper second. So my
Any
lower
particular
day,
reason for that?
because I'm a power lifter and you squat first before you bench press.
Okay.
But so it'd be a squat pattern, a hinge pattern would be my first 2 movements. My third movement, it's going to be lighter, and what I feel like, do I need more work on my quads and my squat, or do I need more work on my hinges? My posterior chain is going to determine that. And then in my off season, I would do my Crossfat stuff after that, and then accessory work, and then list cardio after that. Like my Saturdays and Sunday training sessions, I'm at the gym for like 4 hours. They go pretty
Wow.
long. And then my first upper day, it's going to be 2 press variations. Before I got into my meet prep, I was doing a press and then a row and then a press, which I'll probably go back to that
You're a bit
because
stronger.
my rows need a lot of work. And then it's repeated. It might be different movements, but it's the same pattern for days 2 or days 3 and 4. Squat pattern, then a hinge pattern, and then a press and a pull on my upper day. The main difference though, my day 3 and my day 4, I've got a power rack here where I work, which is super convenient. But those training sessions are shorter because I don't have all the tools that I have at the gym. So I keep those training sessions hour and a half, give or take, on my lunch break. And then like on Saturdays and Sundays, I just go balls to the wall, and I eat a little bit more on Saturdays and Sundays to facilitate that training as
Gotcha.
well.
So pretty classic template there.
Yeah.
Standard upper lower, squat hinge, accessories depending what you're trying to bias, if it's more anterior versus posterior.
Right.
Yeah. Are the percentages different as well? Like more heavy day, light day kind of setup, or same thing?
These days, it's how good does my lower back feel, and do my knees feel like being knees on the day? And I'll kind of, if I feel like there's something there to push, I'll push. If it's not there to push, I'll just kind of do a baseline workout,
Okay.
and just that 70 to 80% range, and take whatever reps are there. Um, a lot of playing it by ear now, just with where I'm at in training.
Yeah. So
And then I'll go more balls out on like the Crossfat stuff, the conditioning work, because I
you
can
could
really push that without having risk of injury.
100%. Like
Yeah,
if you do 300 burpees, that's doable. Whereas if
right.
you try to go balls to the wall on the bench, it's gonna be a different story. So,
Yeah.
you mentioned like feeling achy. So how important is exercise equipment like knee sleeves, wrist wraps, a belt, elbow sleeves? Like, what has your experience been with these devices, and would you recommend it for people who want to just reduce pain in the long term? Like, is that a smart thing that one should do as they get stronger and older?
It's not as important as load management.
Really, eh?
Yeah. Load management should be your number one priority. The belt I look at as an overloading device, because it allows you to squat more and pull more, just by having that there to brace. I would pose that maybe a soft belt would work, but I would pose that being beltless and self-limiting would have you at a lower risk of injury than using a belt
Oh,
pushing. They have their place. Like I wear knee sleeves when I squat. They keep my knees warm. It's great. That said, if I forget my knee sleeves or something for some reason, it's not going to hinder my workout at
yeah,
all.
you'll be fine.
I'm going to be able to train just the same. They're there, they're tools, but without your programming, your load management, if that's not in check, it doesn't matter. You can throw all the band-aids on a problem that you want to, but you got to mitigate the problem first.
Gotcha. Now, assuming one has no problems, their program is perfected, they feel good, everything's auto-regulated. Then, if you add on these tools, does that make a difference?
Yeah, it absolutely does. Especially the belt. My biggest squat, I trained beltless for a long time, just for no other reason other than I didn't have a belt. I squatted 570, was my best without a belt. Uh, the day I put on a belt, and that 570 was a grinder. The day I put on a belt, I squatted 575, and it felt like a speed rep. And
Wow.
it was like 6 weeks later at a meet, I squatted 630. So there's a lot of a good belt, and it was a 13 millimeter Pioneer belt. But there's a lot to be had out of that. The modern knee sleeves they've got now.
So I did Ergo Pro.
Yeah. People are comparing those to like a light wrap. So there's definitely some overload you can get there. The traditional knee sleeves, like I've got a pair of the old SBDs. Maybe if you got like the tightest pair, you might get 5 or 10 pounds of overload, but they're just a comfort thing. They keep your knees warm. Maybe they inspire you to be more confident, and mentally you can
Yeah.
squat more with them. So that's definitely a thing to consider. Um, Now knee wraps, you talk about something adding overload. Like I got 100+ pounds out of knee wraps. So,
Damn.
but that's like 3 meter ins or overkills, like the stiffest wraps you can get. And then a guy that's 6'6" that could deadlift 750 pounds, absolutely cranking down on them,
Right.
wrapping my knee and leaving cuts and bruises on the back of my leg.
It's like a slingshot on your knees, basically.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Knee wraps are crazy. The modern knee wraps are better than like the old squat suits of the
Wow.
70s and 80s, and it's not even close.
Yeah, well, even some of these benching devices now they
Right,
have like double ply and even triple ply slingshots, and they're better than the first designs of bench shirts.
right.
You
Well,
know,
have you seen like the new F8 shirts, like the
that
ones Jimmy Cole wore that
bro,
just
I'm kind of tempted to try that F8 Widowmaker, see how much I can lift on that thing. I
yeah,
reckon at least 500, but who
it's
knows?
crazy, man. Like to see somebody benching 1,400 pounds is like holy shit, dude. Like yeah, it's unreal the amount like how far the equipment has come these days, that even now, like we're talking about knee sleeves, like the new Iron Rebels and the Ergo Pros potentially adding 20-30 pounds to a
That's
squat out of a
crazy.
sleeve. That used to be what suits added back in the day.
Wow.
Yeah.
And I think that's why some of the multiply records back then were more impressive. Well, not more impressive, but like they were stronger. They were still very strong raw because you kind of had to be. You didn't gain that much out of it, like Ryan Kennelly, for example. Well, he's an overall beast, but
Right.
he did like a 670 raw bench, and he wasn't even in his prime doing that. It was just for the fun of it. Let's just test it. So who knows what he could have done, but the prize money at the time was not for raw. So I think there were a lot
Right.
of hidden beasts out there that could have done more.
Oh, I agree, and I would say the judging was tougher in multiply back then too. I'm not really a big fan of some of the judging nowadays. Um, so yeah, the multiply guys back then, and even if you listen to Dave Tate at all, I had a lot of assumptions about how Louis trained his lifters and conjugate only being for gear, and then now listening to Dave Tate's podcast, most of their training was done raw. And that's one of Dave Tate's biggest bitches is that, he didn't get enough time in his suit. Like they didn't use the squat suit until the
Yeah.
meet. They didn't do any free squats in the suit until the meet. And like that was mind blowing to hear that. And they did. They just got really strong raw and then threw a suit on and whatever they got. Whereas now, the guys still got to be relatively strong, but they're so technically proficient with the suits now, and the suits are so much better and require this
Yeah.
technique that you're seeing guys that, whereas before, Dave maybe benched close to 500 raw and then 600 in gear. Well, now dudes are benching 400 raw and 900 in gear. It's
Yeah.
absolutely wild.
Yeah, because they're getting into it right off the bat. It's
Yep.
similar. It reminds me of the teenagers who get into high specificity powerlifting, and
Yeah. Yeah.
they're by the time they're like 20 years old, they're freaking crazy on the relative strength side.
Yep.
But that's all they're good at for the
Yep.
most part.
Yep.
So it's the same thing with the gear. Guys didn't maximize their raw base, and then they're getting the best equipment right off the bat, and it just distorts the ratio completely.
Right, right. Dave Hoff was recently on Dave Tate's podcast, and he said he makes all his lifters learn how to bench in a denim shirt before he'll let them move
Oh
on
my
to
God.
better shirts.
That's like going back in time right
Yeah,
there.
absolutely.
Sheesh. Yeah, that's something that that you never really dabble with though, eh?
No, we've had a couple geared lifters come through the gym and train there for a little bit. It never really appealed to me. I liked, raw strength and being able to display it anywhere at any time for the most part. Even if you're, quote unquote not peaked raw, you're still gonna lift, 90% plus of whatever your best lift is
Yeah.
on a given day. It can be fun to watch. Just seeing the sheer amount of weight moved is,
Yeah, the tendon strength.
yeah.
I think that's the most impressive part, just being able to hold those damn weights, and what the skeleton must look like.
Oh, I know. Yeah. Well, like Jimmy Kolb was at the last meet I competed at. He was there as a judge, and he was
Oh
walking
yeah.
around in the back helping some of the lifter. And you think me and you have good bench leverages? Like this dude looks like a human bowling ball with traps.
Wow.
I mean, it just built the bench. I mean, literally as wide as he is tall. It
That's
was
crazy.
insane. Yeah. Yeah.
Wow. Well, I like Jimmy. I think he's a good guy, and his advice on certain things, like I've been using his reverse grip benching technique.
Yep.
It's the Talon grip,
Yep.
and wow, honestly, I'm not one for minimalism, but that exercise right there will build the hell out of your triceps. I feel it more than any other close grip bench I've ever done.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because it forces you in that position.
He's got triceps for days, man. And I'll just speak briefly. Like super nice guy. He was giving random lifters handoffs in the warm up room so they could get pictures with him and stuff. And dude's great for the sport. He does a scholarship fund every year to pay for future power lifters, like young guys, teenagers, and
Yeah.
stuff. And so he's great all around for the sport. People can throw off on geared lifting, which I've been known to do myself, but Jimmy's a stand up guy, and he's brutally strong raw too. I know a lot of people don't know that. Like he's got videos on his Instagram. I think he did 495 for a set of 10 raw.
Yep. He did a 600 reverse grip, 405 for 20.
Yeah, yeah. Dude's an absolute monster.
Yeah, people got to look beyond just the competition stuff.
Yep.
That said, regarding the bench press, there's always this debate, right? Like, what's more important, the pecs or the triceps?
They're both important. And that's the thing with the internet. We always want a black and white this,
Yeah.
one or the other. And there's, like your pendulum. There's an in-between area,
That's right.
and that's where it's at. You want to have strong pecs and strong triceps. They're both important. If gun to my head, pecs. All right, the pecs are more important. That's
Gotcha.
they're bigger. Bigger muscle, they're going to do more off. If you're fast enough off your chest, you don't need a whole lot of triceps.
Yeah, you'll probably lock it out,
Yeah.
unless you have a real lockout issue.
Yeah. But that's not saying triceps aren't important. They're both important. But yeah, gun to my head, I would say pecs, just for that very reason. Because if you have no pecs and all triceps, you're not going to be able to bench as much as if you have all pecs and no triceps.
Yeah. Well, actually, in your case, your arms were, 17 and a half inches?
Well, they were closer to 19, but they weren't lean at all. So,
Well, still, that's good.
I call them fat seps is what they were. They weren't biceps. They were fat seps. But and they were all tricep. There was no biceps at all. It was all triceps and fat.
Well, that means you probably had 20s if you would have done the biceps more seriously.
Yeah, I should have done some more curls.
My God. So, what are they at now that you're lean?
I haven't measured them. I don't know. They're probably 16, if I'm guessing. 16 and a half. I don't know.
They got to be bigger than mine.
I guess after we get off here, I'm going to have to measure them and post on Instagram or something.
Yeah.
I don't know.
I'd give you at least 17, but no, I just find it interesting, because I've seen a lot of strong raw benchers who have enormous pecs, but sometimes their triceps don't show for it. Whereas in the geared world, I always see them have massive triceps.
Right.
So I feel like, heck, if your goal would be bodybuilding, we can make the case that using accommodating resistance and all these overload variations could actually be pretty darn good for triceps, especially the accessories that you'll do. But I think that raw powerlifting is a lot better for pec hypertrophy, especially with the emphasis on the pausing and the tempo stuff too that's become a bit more popular.
Yeah, I would agree, and and it makes sense too because the geared guys, their issue is getting the bar down to touch, and then that first little bit coming off a chest.
Yeah, so they don't even need
their
that
shirts
portion.
doing that. So yeah, they need triceps to
upper back and triceps.
Yep.
Yeah. So one last question about the bench. So you mentioned doing incline close grip bench, which I agree is a phenomenal lift because you get that nice deep arm bend. It's one of the better compounds actually for tris. Are you big on extensions at all for your clients or push downs, like just isolating the triceps?
Yep. He's actually doing decline dumbbell extensions are in his program right now.
Nice.
I personally I'm a big fan of like the cable triceps push downs. Just out of convenience, it's easy to set up. It's easy to do a drop set by myself. I can just take the pin out and put it in the next one. But I'm a big fan of extensions. I have some clients will do skull crushers or JM presses. For me personally, for whatever reason, both of those movements have always aggravated my elbows, so I've had to stay away from them anytime I've gotten any sort of heavy with them. It's just aggravated me, so it's not something I've been able to make use of, but they're great movements, and I've seen clients have great success with them.
Okay, but you've used the dumbbells without pain, right? It's just the barbell that caused you problems?
Yeah, like the barbell. I've even tried like the SSB JM
even that
press. One. Yeah. They just all aggravate my elbows. But with dumbbells, and again, I still have to stay relatively light. They seem to be okay. But the cable machine, doing extensions both overhead, press downs, etc. Those my triceps like those a lot.
Yeah. It's all about alignment, and I guess in your case, you've accumulated so much muscle that you can't really handle something that's too restrictive, or else your elbows are just going to feel like garbage. Whereas the cables, you can nail it every time. And even the dumbbells, not perfectly aligned. There's still a little bit of, play there. But I'm curious, when you say light, what do you define as that for dumbbell extension specifically per hand?
Well, like I've never used more than the 50s.
Oh, yeah? Damn.
Yeah. Like I've kept it real light and real bodybuilder rep ranges.
Okay. I would have loved to see what you can do because I bet it would be at least the 70s.
Yeah, it's just one of those things where the juice probably isn't worth the squeeze. And it's risking aggravating my elbow. If something's gonna aggravate my elbow, it's gonna be a fucking heavy bench press.
Exactly, not a little fluff movement. But so then you prefer higher reps 4 extensions.
Yeah. My triceps have responded great. I've dabbled with trying some lower rep stuff. And what ends up happening is I end up losing my isolation with it, and my pecs and my shoulders end up starting to try to help out too much. So I get much better a mind muscle connection, just keeping it lighter and higher rep.
Perfect. And is there any dead stop in that, or is it always or pausing in the bottom?
I'll do both. Yeah, I'll do some dead stop. I'll do some just go hammer it out. Just depends on the day and how I'm feeling. Sometimes I just feel like, hey, let's do a pause and let's make it artificially harder to get more reps. And then some days I'm like, well, let's just see how many reps we can blast out in a short amount of time.
Okay, cool. So all 3 mostly with cables, just because they feel the best. That's
right.
The approach to extensions.
Yep.
Oh, I think that's very fair. And in terms of the lower body stuff, do you feel like what are your thoughts on isolating, say, the hamstrings, or working on certain deep knee bending positions, or doing more front squats as opposed to back squats? Like, is there an approach that you would say is beneficial for injury prevention for the squat and the deadlift? Like, what are some like overall bangers that kind of cover all your needs?
I love hamstring curls. I abuse our hamstring curl machine. That's one of my favorite accessory movements, period. As far as like knee bendy stuff, I've gone, full training blocks doing front squats as opposed to back squats, here and there. And my best deadlifts have always come off of front squat PRs. So that tidbit for those of you guys out there, that's personal anecdote, but it could be the same for you as well. But yeah, all my last 3-4 deadlift PRs have come off of front squat PRs. We recently got a belt squat. I've been using that a lot, not having that load on your spine and still being able to get the squat. I've been a big fan of lunges. I like extensions, but sometimes my knees don't. And what I've been doing lately is and I got this from Isaiah Rivera. He's a professional dunker. So the plyometric community, there's a lot of tidbits out there. We were talking about getting stuff from different people, especially in terms of, lower body and your knees and injury prevention. Those guys, that's of utmost importance to them. But I'll take the leg extension with a lightweight and I'll extend it out and then do isometric holds with it. And after a 15, 20-second isometric hold, I'll lower it slowly. And sometimes, I've torn my meniscus in one knee. I've got Osgood-Schlatter's disease I had as a teen in that knee. And on the way back down, there's a small range of motion where sometimes I'll have sharp pains. And I can do this isometric. And, sometimes depending upon the day, I can go heavier or lighter. But as I slowly bring it back, I can kind of gauge and see if that sharp pain is going to be there or not in a very controlled manner. And, based on the pain being there, being not there, being bad, being not so bad, I can make a determination if that's a good day for me to push or not, on kind of my knee bend movements.
Interesting.
And then reverse sled drags, knee health, pulling sleds backwards has been absolutely paramount in keeping my knees together.
Interesting. I like the tip with the isometric.
Yeah, that's been huge. That's something probably I've only picked up in the last 5 or 6 months. But man, it's, for overall knee health and injury prevention, I feel like that's been something that's made a notable difference in my training.
Yeah, and in general, isolating the knee extension portion. I feel like guys don't do that at all. Well, they just do squats. And I used to be in that camp as well, and there's nothing wrong with that for just having massive legs. But you'd be surprised at like how weak you are at those isolated motions.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, they'll humble you in a hurry.
Oh yeah, for sure. But you're probably like maxing out the stack, or at least close to it, eh?
On the curls, yes. On the extensions, my knee doesn't like that, so we keep it. I keep it like I think I've done this year like 60 pounds on the stack has been as heavy as I've pushed it. Yeah, because my knees, man, they've seen better days to say the least. So
wow.
Yeah.
Well, it's cool. It's cool that you have exactly what Louis Simmons was prescribing a long time ago, like a stronger hamstring to quad ratio in the isolated sense. Like maxing out the laying leg curl machine. That's what you're talking about.
Yep.
That is crazy. For me, I'm much stronger at the leg extension portion.
Right.
And most guys is like that as well. And maxing it out is that's a feat of strength of its own. Like you can probably do Nordics no problem, or if you can't, it's because you're too heavy. But I think you can like rep out 10 with that level of leg curl strength.
Yeah. I've always liked the way they felt. And then we had an old I think it was a basketball coach back in middle school, and he would have us do hamstring curls, and he would always say that hamstrings for go, quads for show, and that just stuck with 12-year-old me for whatever reason. He didn't think quads were worth a shit, and he was all about the hamstrings, and that I don't know if that just intrinsically stuck with me as a core memory for whatever reason, but I always enjoyed hamstring curls and have no problem just absolutely
Yeah.
pushing.
Well, I think it explains a lot that you managed to squat so much with a genetic condition for your knees. I didn't even know
Right.
about that till today
Yeah.
without having problems.
And I think that too is why I got a lot out of knee wraps, because they kind of artificially make your knees down there. They help a lot at the bottom. Then having the posterior chain to finish it off, coming out of there. Because I've squatted 650 in sleeves, and then I attempted 675, which was stupid of me. I should that 650 was like a 20-pound PR, and I should have just took it and saved it for the next training block. But you're so close to having that next plate on there in sleeves. And this is after I'd squatted 775 in wraps. So I'd already squatted 100 pounds more than this. I had nothing to prove, but I was like, YOLO, I want to do this. And the 650 moved well. And then I tore my meniscus on my bad knee attempting that 675. And that's what led to me benching 550, because I had to go a whole year without squatting and deadlifting. And I specialized in bench again.
It seems to be a common story that someone injures their lower body in some kind of way, a motorcycle accident or in the gym, and then their bench press becomes their best lift.
That's how it goes.
Yeah. And I think it's because you can allocate all your recovery towards it. Not necessarily that your frequency is high or anything like that. It's just the
100%.
absolute loads are just more systemically taxing, right?
100%. And at that point, I'd already had the base of strength in my lower body. Whereas before, when I was a bench bro, I hadn't trained lower body yet.
Oh, yeah.
So I already had that good base, and I'd already benched 525, and then I had a chance to really push bench press and focus all recovery on bench press and not deadlifting and squatting. And you're absolutely right. That added recovery was everything.
So I think we know your secret, Dennis, to elite benching performance.
Yeah, just don't do the other lifts.
Just be a leg day skipper. Done deal. Well, it's funny because even when I was training for my best bench, I was very, very lazy with legs.
Right.
Like you can say I basically didn't train them, like the bare minimum, just to maintain the slightest amount. But especially when you're maxing out a lot or you're going really heavy, you need
That's how I would coach a bench specialist. I would have them doing the bare minimum, effective doses of lower body work, and then just absolutely pushing bench.
Wow. So when you weren't able to train your legs to the same extent, did your benching programming change, or was it the same but you can just recover better? Like, were you going a lot heavier? Did you up your frequency? Like,
Yep. Yeah. More intensity, more volume, more frequency. All of the above. I
just doing more work.
At it. Yep. When I was balls deep into powerlifting, I was only benching once a day. Or once a week, excuse me.
Okay.
Because I was squatting and deadlifting heavy, and those were taxing as shit. But when I couldn't squat or deadlift, I went back to benching 3 times a week.
3 times.
Yeah, and we're talking benching 400 or 500 pounds 3 times a week, and really pushing it hard. And when you get to a very advanced level, you've got to find either new tricks or you've got to really push it like that. Sundays was my big day. And then whatever 2 days during the week I could get in, be it a Tuesday, be it a Wednesday, a Thursday, or Friday. So sometimes there would be back-to-back days. Sometimes there wouldn't.
Okay.
But it was just depending upon, my work schedule and my wife's work schedule and our son and everything like that. So, Sunday was the only day that was like a sure bet.
I thought you were going to say that it was based on auto-regulation, but you're telling me scheduling from that. Okay.
I mean, there
Wow.
was some auto regulating involved, but definitely life circumstances were dictating what days I was in there.
Interesting. Found that like even twice a week, bench specialization is rough. So to do that 3 days a week, I can see why your bench exploded in that time frame. You know, but you
Right.
must really like that was the only thing on your mind, kind of thing.
Yeah, yeah, it was. And then, when I went back to full power after that, my bench, dropped probably, 7,
Uh,
8%.
wow. We talked about progressive overload, the way you approach it with your main movements, the periodization style. I mean, everything's here.
I lost all this weight and you didn't even ask me about my diet.
You're right. I didn't ask about your diet. Shame on me. I got so caught up in the muscle and the strength that I didn't ask about that. So
Right.
first of all, you went from 308
Yeah,
or
yeah. When I started losing weight, I was a 308 power lifter, but I was right at like 300, 301 pounds, give or take.
oh, okay, so a bit over 300, and then you
Yep.
got down to like 212, right?
I weighed in at 212 for my meet. At the end of my cut, like real weight loss, I was like 215. And then I ended the cut December of last year. And of course, when you end a cut, you go back into maintenance, you put about 5 pounds back on
Yeah,
water,
of course.
boat. And I hung around the low 220s until my meet. And I did a water cut for the meet. That's something I wanted to learn how to do. I'd never done one before. I didn't really need to cut as much water as I did, but I wanted to do the full experience so I could be able to help other people do it potentially, and for myself to be able to do again. So I water cut down to 212 for that meet. But real weight, I lost like 85 pounds.
85 pounds. Wow.
Yep.
Well, first of all, congratulations for doing that. That's a lot. That's crazy. You know, I can't even imagine losing that much weight, you know, especially at that body fat going down.
Yeah, for
And
sure.
and you look really good, by the way. Like you revealed the muscle that was always there. So I
I
always find it
appreciate it.
interesting when an elite natural who has the strength cuts down and then just mogs everyone to oblivion. So, and from what I could tell, I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't really see any loose skin for the most part
I do on my lower belly. I've got
on
some
your
loose
lower
skin.
belly.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
But you're mostly pretty tight.
Yeah, I stored a lot in my belly. Just
Ah,
genetically, that's where I ended up storing a lot of weight. Even at my heaviest, you could still see some quad striations, and my shoulders would striate, under load. But yeah, I just genetically store a lot in my belly, and it definitely stretched. Of course, I ate a lot too.
my
So
God.
yeah, we got a little bit of loose skin down there, but it's not too bad, honestly.
Right. So how did it change your life from losing 85 pounds? Should you have done it sooner?
Uh, I'm okay with not having done it sooner, and I honestly didn't plan on doing it when I did. It kind of happened on a whim, which is crazy to think of. It's funny too because regular people notice weight loss. They don't care how much you can bench press. You don't walk
Yeah.
around 300 pounds and people be like, "Oh man, I bet that dude squats almost 800 pounds." They don't know. But when people have seen you and then you lose a bunch of weight, and they're like, "Oh wow, you worked so hard and you must have dieted so
Mm,
hard and this and that." And like honestly, even when I was fat, I was more meticulous about my eating patterns than when I was losing weight because
they
it was
don't get.
facilitating my performance. And I'm like, I was working harder the last 10
Yeah.
years being big than I did this
Uh-huh.
last year losing weight. Don't get me
Yep.
wrong, like I appreciated the compliments and I didn't sit here and explain this to them because they don't care, don't know. But it just internally in my head screaming like, oh man, like this is the real world. This is what
I
other
know.
people notice. Day to day life, my sleeping improved big time. That's the single biggest thing. The biggest revelation is I can sleep on my back now. When I was
Yeah.
fat, if I slept on my back, I would damn near choke to death. I'd have these wild dreams about dying and
My
like
God.
sleep paralysis.
Did you have a
Um,
CPAP at the time?
I didn't use a CPAP. I
Damn.
I
You
I
probably had
probably
sleep
should
apnea.
have.
Yeah, for sure.
If I went to sleep on my side, which is what I tried to do, I was fine. But if I rolled over in my sleep on my back, it was crazy. And I was talking to my wife about it, and I was telling her how like I was choking to death, and she was like, "Oh, I thought you were just having the best sleep over there snoring, so I didn't want to bother you." I'm like, "No, I was dying. I wish you would
Wow.
have woke me up." And but yeah, sleeping on my back's been amazing. That's really the single biggest thing that's changed. Obviously, like feeling more energetic in general, Not that I ever felt low energy, because I did keep up with my cardio and stuff, but I definitely can get up and about and moving much quicker without needing to do the dad groan when I get up, like that.
Yeah, yeah.
I just get up now when I wake up, don't have to make any extra noises or anything like that. And then, man, just feeling better in general from eating more nutritionally dense foods. Like, not that I neglected nutrition when I was big, because I did eat a lot of good foods, but I ate a lot of junk with it. Now that my calories are much lower, I feel like I do need to be more meticulous with them. So I pretty much strictly clean throughout the week. On the weekends, like I said, I have my big 4-hour training sessions. After those sessions is if I want a cheat meal or something like that, I will feel free to have them then, because I just trained my ass off, and it's going to facilitate the next day's training. And maintenance wise has been fine. I've been staying at the same weight now for like the last 3 months, doing it that way. I still do a lot of fasting. I'll basically Thursday evening to Friday evening, I do a 24-hour fast. Friday evening, I'll have what I call a clean sheet, where I'll have a really big meal, but it is all clean foods, and it's usually like a steak and sweet potatoes and asparagus or something like that, or some fruits. And then, like I said, on the weekends, if I want to splurge a little, I will. But that's also something where, I'll have my splurge meal maybe Saturday morning after training. I'll typically have like overnight oats before training, but like Saturday evening, I'll just have a big salad. Like, it's hashtag Big Salad Saturdays on my Instagram. I post it very frequently. And then Sundays, I treat like Saturdays. And then I'll fast out of the weekends. So from Sunday evening to Monday evening, I'll do another 24-hour fast.
Damn.
So I'm basically, fasting into a bigger eating surplus, and then fasting out of it. And then just kind of, I eat 2 meals a day, Tuesday, Wednesday,
Nice.
Thursday.
Wow.
And, those are 16-hour fasts on those days too. Fasting's been a way for me to still have filling meals, feel like I'm eating a lot while
because you have the appetite still.
yeah, oh yeah, yeah.
But
That
and with the
appetite is
fasting,
unaware.
those 2 meals are massive, and you're good off that.
Yep, absolutely.
Nice. Well, it sounds like it really made a difference, specifically the fasting. And have you ever tried like 48s and 72s, or that's
I
like a whole
have.
different?
Yeah. I did a handful. I've never went 72. I think my longest one was like 54. But I did multiple 48-hour fasts during my cut. I can't say one way or the other if it made me feel any sort of way, but it certainly helped with mitigating calories. And a lot of times I would do those 48-hour fasts either after a cheat day or leading into a cheat day, just to kind of build that calorie buffer.
It's always like that, eh?
Yep.
Yeah, and when you lost these 85 pounds, would you say most of it was aggressive? Because you did that in it didn't take that long. So like what was the weekly rate of fat loss?
I'd really have to go back and look, but I weighed in for a meet last year in January at 294. Then I think I started the cut in March of last year. And I actually, what facilitated it, I got the flu in March, and I couldn't eat for like a whole weekend. It took everything in me to get down like a can of soup and a piece of toast. And I dropped 10 pounds. I was intending on competing that July as a 308 again and trying to up my total again, but I lost that 10 pounds. And I noticed, like, after I felt better, like
You
my
felt extra
typically
better.
voracious appetite, I was like, well, I kind of have control on it right now. Let's just kind of see where this goes. And so at first, I even fasted when I was 300 pounds. Like, fasting is something I've always done since like 2015. If I ate every time I was hungry and as much as I wanted to, I'd be like 500 pounds.
Damn.
So I was always fasting, but I basically just started, switching out some of the desserts and not eating them, or, using Greek yogurt instead, and then skipping. I would eat McDonald's a lot on training days. It sounds counterintuitive, but you look at the makeup of McDonald's foods, there's lots of sodium, there's lots of carbohydrates, and it doesn't take up a lot of space in your stomach.
True.
It's great food for training, for powerlifting anyway.
It's the truth.
Sodium and carbs is what you want. So, I cut out the McDonald's and stuff like that. And
just curious to cut you off real quick.
Yep.
What'd your McDonald's meal look like?
I posted a picture recently. So my typical McDonald's order, like if it was a pre-training meal, let's distinguish two things. If
Yeah,
it was a
like bloat maxing mode. Trying to get
pre-training
strong.
meal would be like two bacon, egg, and cheese McGriddles, a hash brown, and an iced coffee.
Okay.
So
Not bad.
not too bad. Now, if I was just going there to get dinner and eat it or something, two McDoubles, two McChickens, a large fry, four apple pies, and an iced coffee.
Oh shit.
That was my regular, I'm going to get dinner meal. So, but yeah, so started cleaning up my diet, and then eating cleaner. I was still eating like cheeses and stuff like that. I would add onto my eggs. Like I was on a ricotta cheese kick for a little bit, but gradually started doing away with some of these additives as well. Not that cheese is bad. Don't get me wrong. I'm not saying that. There's cheese on my salad that I'm going to go eat today. But just getting rid of these extras, basically just eating super clean. I leaned on watermelon a lot. 7 pounds of watermelon flesh is only 1,000 calories. If you cut 7 pounds out of a watermelon, good luck eating all of that. So finding self-limiting foods like that, and it's sweet, so it cured my sweet tooth. Micronutrient profile is good. It's hydrating. Watermelon was huge. I found a specific sugar-free, non-fat Greek yogurt that is only 350 calories and 75 grams of protein for 2 pounds of Greek yogurt. So wow. Yeah, just like the most godly macros ever.
Well, sign me up for this brand.
yeah. It's Chobani makes one. Theirs is a little bit less protein, but the same calories. But we have a Kroger as a grocery store chain here, and their store brand has that god tier macros one. But finding foods like that where I could eat a lot of it for a little amount of calories. One to cure my sweet tooth, for some carbohydrates, one high protein, egg whites, lean meats, of course, vegetables, obviously. And 2 meals a day. I was down to at the end of my cut. Some days, 1,000, 1,200 calories. On my weekends, I would probably 2,500 ish calories. So probably averaging around 1,700, 1,800 calories a day.
Sheesh, man.
Near the end of the cut. A lot of people are like, "Oh, dude, there's no way. I eat this many calories and stuff." And I try to tell them, like, I work a desk job.
Yeah.
I do my cardio, of course, but I work a desk job. I'm getting a little older now. Metabolism probably a little slower, but yeah, that's where I was at. Now, like I said, I'm upper 220s most days. I'm still only averaging probably around 2,000, 2,200 calories per day.
That low?
Yeah. My weekends are probably around 3,000, sometimes 3,500 if I splurge.
Yeah.
And then like Monday, coming out of my fast, and I only eat one meal on Monday. Usually it's like an 800 calorie meal, whatever I had prepped for the week for lunches. And then Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, 1,800, 1,900 calories. Wow. So maybe I'm averaging 2,300 calories if you're counting.
Probably around there, but talk about a lifestyle change. You went from probably 5,000 plus, or at least around there, 4,000, 5,000.
Yeah, 3,500 to 4,000. My maintenance calories have never been as high as people thought. Yeah. And I've had to work to keep weight off even when I was 300 pounds. I couldn't just eat whenever I wanted to and whatever I wanted to.
Wow. Well, I will say this. I'm not surprised that you have to drop the calories to 1,800, because I did the exact same thing. And people, and people were like, "What? You're only consuming that?" Well, when you have a lot of muscle mass and you get pretty low in body fat, and because of your frame and all the muscle you built over the years, like, sure, you're in the 200s, but it's lean 200s. It's not the same as your DL weighing that. So for you, I don't know what the body fat is, but it's on the lower end. So 1,800, with the desk job included, right?
Yeah.
It's not surprising. Then it averages out with the cheat meals, So I guess when someone's never calculated, they never scanned their food or added things up, they're in the dark. But once you do it meticulously, and you did it for basically a year, right, to lose all that weight.
Well, Alex, I've counted calories and weighed them out
a lot longer.
Everything before.
Of course,
last year I didn't do that, but I've done it enough to where, and I recommend everybody do it for at least a few months, so you can get a feel for what serving sizes actually are.
For sure.
And you're gonna cry when you see the serving size of peanut butter.
I know.
Because what most people are using is way more than a serving.
Oh yeah.
But yeah, people are in the dark on their calories, and if they've never actually tracked before.
True. Yeah, before you were tracking it for to fuel your performance goals, and
Right.
this way it was the opposite. And it sounds like your diet was quite simple, to be honest,
It
as
was.
most things are. You substituted out the things that were very calorically dense for cleaner sources, and then
Yep.
with the fasting, 2 meals a day, you can still eat big. That's it, you know.
And then when you're eating stuff that's more nutrient dense,
It fills you to the same extent.
yeah, it feels, you feel fuller with less calories, and it facilitates better just health and performance in general.
You mentioned the watermelon. 7 pounds
Yep.
of that is hard to consume. What are some other like foods that just do it for you? Like it doesn't matter how much you eat, you just can't get fat off it, and it
Like,
satisfies
watermelons
you
are
every
the big
time.
one, of course. The main one, definitely watermelons. I like getting frozen berries.
Ah,
The frozen ones in particular, because especially if you like eat them frozen or just slightly thawed out, they're so cold you can't really eat them fast. And
yeah.
that self limits it as well, as berries generally
I
being low calorie anyway.
I love how you're
Uh,
saying self-limiting foods. We have
yeah,
self-limiting variations, and now it's in the kitchen as
yeah,
well.
yeah,
That's
absolutely,
sick.
absolutely. Low key potatoes, especially if you boil them. People think potatoes and they think French fries.
Yeah.
But just like a white potato or a sweet potato, you can eat a lot for not many calories. And if you boil them, they're really satiating. They get the water in them, and it'll fill you up. Another thing I like doing with potatoes is like cutting them up and roasting them with zucchini. A pound or a pound and a half of potatoes, you're really not looking at a whole lot of calories there. Even though you would think a pound of potatoes, and then you take a pound or a pound and a half, whatever, equal parts zucchini, and roast them together. And the zucchini's virtually calorie free. It's not actually calorie free, but and that's something again that you can eat like 4 pounds of food and be extremely full for not a lot of calories. Then you throw a protein source in with that, whatever it may be, egg whites, whey, meat, lentils, tofu, and you're going to be extremely full and extremely satisfied. And yeah, that's something I've looked at, and for people with big appetites, I would look that direction too. Like, you
Yeah.
can make these things taste good with cooking methods. Get an air fryer. Air fryer has been a game changer.
Nice.
And
So
yeah, and it doesn't have to be boring. I post a lot of my food posts on Instagram. You guys can look at. I post the stuff that don't look so good, the stuff that is just fuel
mhm.
and it's there, and then I post the things that do look really good. A little bit of this, a little bit of that. But you can definitely diet well, eat well, to fuel your performance, to fuel your health and nutrition, and still enjoy the food that you're eating.
Yeah, and be full at the same time, like you
Yep.
mentioned. Like potatoes are very filling, and I think studies even demonstrate it has a higher thermic effect than meat of all things. So you can
Which
eat,
is that's bonkers to
which is
think of.
insane, but like you can
Yep.
eat all these, and then the zucchini, you're doubling down on the vegetables, frozen berries. You can have 500 grams of that, and there's no calories in it. Even when I was
Right.
shredding for bodybuilding, I was having berries like twice a day. In psychotic amounts.
I bet.
And I love the tip about the cold, but like all these little tricks, and then even even if it is a bit more dense, like because you're adding some seasonings on there, it's fine. It's still gonna be
Right.
less than all this processed garbage. So I think
Absolutely.
that's the main message in this. You're finding ways of cooking it that's enjoyable for you. So you like your air fryer. This way you get that nice like fried taste,
Oh yeah, yeah.
but you're using good ingredients and you're
Yep.
still flavoring it. So it's not bland and boring like these bodybuilders that are just having basic bro foods. So because
Say,
nothing that you described was broish is what I'm saying. It's
yeah,
smart,
yeah.
but it's not broish.
Don't get me wrong. Like, I'll eat eggs and cream of rice. I like eggs and cream of rice. I'll have my bro stuff from time to time, but I'm absolutely not going to eat chicken, rice, and broccoli every day, and egg whites, and they serve their purpose. And in a pinch, I'm absolutely not too shy or ashamed to use something like that. But I like to enjoy my food, and 90% of
Absolutely.
the time, it is going to be something that I'm going to enjoy eating.
Yeah, and you lost damn near 100 pounds doing that, and I think
Yep.
a lot of people will be happy with your physique and body fat. So know that for anyone watching right now, you can get very far with very simple modifications. Like
Absolutely.
it's not as complicated as the fitness industry likes to make it out.
Nope. Not at all.
Yeah. Diet and programming, if you really look at things objectively, like it's a big, I'm not even going to go there for today, but
Like I say, and I've said it on my channel 1,000 times. I talk to Paris almost every day. I've said it to him a bunch of times. Like 90% of everything is what you need to be doing, and it's
yeah,
simple basics. Almost everything that's on YouTube is that 10%
yeah,
of the icing on the cake. The little specialties of advanced people who've been there and done it and are arguing over these little itty bitty things
that's
when we
right.
all agree on the 90% to get
I
there.
know. And even look back, like there was so many debates and there was a lot more drama back in the day, but like they were still mostly in agreement, even with
Right?
those
Yeah.
things. So
Yeah.
it's like, what's the
Absolutely.
point of arguing?
Right.
So it's just funny when you let your emotions go, look at it objectively. It's like, yeah, it's the last 10%. But I feel like today we covered more than the last 10%. There was a lot of gems in here. It's like I definitely learned some things today that I'll be experimenting with, specifically with calisthenics of all things. You got me thinking about certain training ideas. So
That's
you know,
awesome.
it's always important to have, conversations with experienced lifters, guys who are stronger than you, better than you, or even less, right? And you just exchange back and forth and develop a philosophy that's really out there to help people. So man, this has been an amazing chat. First of all, thank you for coming on the channel. Thank you for your support all these years. You've always been there for me, showing love in your way. I mean, a lot has come for this moment, so it's been great. I wanted to ask you, man, if you can go back in time, like what advice would you give to your younger self as it pertains to being a lifter? And what's like your number one pro tip that you have for my audience who wants to just get jacked and strong?
Just going back in time, just like seriously, just to be an open book and not be so dogmatic and being stuck in your ways. That Dunning-Kruger effect.
Right.
Just be more open-minded from the beginning. And for the people watching that want to get jacked, strong, whatever your goals are, master the basics. The basics are going to take you farther than you're going to think. Don't worry about what the most advanced people are doing right now. You focus on mastering the basics, and you get those basics down, and you give yourself, 5, 10 good years of consistent training, and getting really dialed in, and you are going to be absolutely surprised with how far that takes you.
I love it. 5 to 10 years, not 3 years.
Right.
And focus on the fundamentals, and you'll find that you don't even need all this crazy stuff that's being promoted nowadays.
Right.
Or if you do, you've earned it. Now it's time
Earn it.
to
Earn it.
refine.
Yep. Earn it.
Lovely. Well, all great advice. And if people want to see more from you, where can they do so?
You can find me here on YouTube, FreakieD. Then on Instagram, it is Freaky with IE _D _0550. I'm sure Alex will probably have the links in the description. That's where you need to get with me if you want to seek out my coaching services. I can send you an intake questionnaire. Those are 2 places you can find me on here.
Perfect. Well, like you said, I'll be sure to include all those links in the description box. And with that said, we are done for today. Dennis, thank you again for coming on. It was an absolute pleasure. And we'll chat some more soon.
Thanks for having me. I enjoyed it, man.
Likewise.